This public meeting of the Board of Education for June 13th, 2023 is called to order. All items being considered this evening are posted on the PPS website under the Board of Meetings tabs. The meeting is being streamed live on PPS TV Services website and on Channel 28. It will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks, and you can check the district website for replay times. Has anyone checked the district website for replay times? Does anyone do that?
Yes, always.
Okay, good. I say it every week, but I'm not sure anyone actually does it. Good evening tonight. Welcome, everybody. We do have a full agenda of some important items tonight. Before we get started, just share a few of our regular reminders. In order to ensure safety, please keep the walkways and aisles clear. And we also ask that you be considerate for those around you. Keep any signs below chin level. In order to keep from exceeding the occupancy level, which I don't think we're going to do tonight, but maybe, we have set up an overflow seating and viewing area under the covered area in front of the building. If we do get to capacity, we'll do that at the time. If we do get to capacity and you're signed up for public comment, you can check in with campus security, and they will be able to let you in when it's your turn to speak. And with that, let's go ahead and get going on our meeting. Tonight, we're going to start with a resolution to recognize June as Pride Month. Superintendent Guerrero.
Yes, good evening, directors, and good evening to our audience members here in person and online. This month, Portland Public Schools lifts up and celebrates our LGBTQ2SIA+ students, staff, and families. This month affords an opportunity for us as a school system, for all of us, to renew our commitment to creating the conditions that allow every one of our community members to thrive. For those who identify as allies, it's our responsibility to disrupt hate and injustice and to create affirming and safe spaces for LGBTQ2SIA+ students, families, and staff. We want every one of our students to feel inspired, supported, and accepted for who they authentically are, wherever their interests, whatever their passions, whatever their abilities, and yes, whatever their sexual orientation or gender identity. I've asked our Chief of Research Assessment and Accountability, Dr. Renard Adams, to present the resolution to you this evening. Dr. Adams.
Good evening, Superintendent. Good evening, Chair Scott, Vice Chair Hollins, Board Directors, and Student Representative McMahon. Happy Pride Month. On June 28th, 1969, police officers raided the Stonewall Inn on Christopher Street in New York City. The Stonewall Inn, like many establishments of its time, was a rare place where gay and queer people could come together and gather, expressing themselves openly. Raids of LGBTQ+ bars and establishments had been common for decades. In the course of the raid, patrons were harassed, arrested, and beaten. Fed up with this ongoing treatment, bystanders began to push back against the police brutality, resulting in 6 days and nights of social unrest along Christopher Street. 1 year later, LGBTQ+ Americans in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco held the first marches to commemorate the Stonewall Rebellion, and thus Pride was born. Pride Month is an opportunity for us to reflect on the societal accomplishments of LGBTQ+ Americans and the diversity that spans the range of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, and more. Pride is a month of inclusivity, indeed, all the colors of the rainbow. Pride Month is a time for LGBTQ+ Americans to stand and shout, "We're here." Pride Month is a time of celebration and acknowledgement. Therefore, I'd like to thank the board for voting to approve this resolution affirming June as Pride Month. Some would say that these proclamations are performative and don't matter. I couldn't disagree more. At this time when LGBTQ+ people are under attack and being killed, at this time when some politicians are doubling down on the rhetoric of hate, at this time when queer people perhaps feel more fragile and vulnerable than in recent memory, at this time, these proclamations matter a great deal. In fact, they matter more than ever. And I'm reminded of a few things. Proclamations show intent to honor, intent to value, and they express acknowledgement. Acknowledgement matters. Acknowledgement leads to acceptance. Acceptance matters. Acceptance leads to visibility. And I know personally that visibility saves lives. Our mere existence is resistance, and we appreciate your support of the resistance. Resistance against divisiveness, resistance against hate, and resistance against bigotry. Keeping it personal, local, and immediate, A few weeks ago, I was in a meeting I was in kicked off with a warm welcome question. Name your favorite fashion accessory. Seems simple, right? I thought long and hard, and I could have named a suit or a pair of shoes. In the end, I named my wedding band because I wasn't always able to marry. It may seem so simple, but it really is profound. All we LGBTQ plus individuals ask is that we be allowed to live our truth out loud, openly, and without fear of repercussions or worse. Such a simple ask, yet so profound and too often denied. Therefore, I want to again thank you, board directors, for your consideration. Thank you for standing in solidarity with and in support of LGBTQ plus students, staff, and community members. Thank you from all of us, and happy Pride.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt resolution?
So moved.
710? Moved by Director Green, seconded by a lot of people, but I'm going to give Director Constam the second. Board discussion. I'm sorry, Director to pass, seconds. Kara.
Happy Pride Month. I think you just made the most eloquent case for why we consider proclamations, and I really appreciate that. And I also want to, for the last 2 years in this state, there's been a lot of school districts and classrooms and school environments in which students and staff haven't felt safe or welcome. And I'm proud of PPS for creating a different climate in most of our schools. You can walk through the school buildings and see signs that are very visible signs of inclusion and welcoming. So to all the staff, and I want to thank you, Dr. Adams, for your leadership, because when people stand out and speak out, that sends a message to our students, and you have been a leader since you arrived. And you've always got also very nice attire that shows your pride. So thank you for your leadership, and also to the district staff for the welcoming and inclusive environment, not just during Pride Month, but all year round.
As we vote on this, I think it's really important to reflect on some of the things that have happened in our district just in the last month, where a Pride event had to be canceled due to security concerns. And I know that district staff has worked hard to think about how can we make sure that doesn't happen again, that we're able to hold those Pride events even when local radio hosts drum up people to attack the school. And I really appreciate the district centering that. And we know from the successful school survey last year that over half of our students in high school and middle school self-identify as queer in some way. And so we need those spaces, even when those voices, even when that vitriol comes. I think, we need to stand firm and continue to hold those Pride events, continue to have those safe spaces for our parents to have conversations about gender identity and supporting their students. And so I'm really thankful that as we move forward, we're going to ensure that those kind of events can go forward, because we know that, proclamations are important, and so is ensuring that those kind of events can happen for our local communities to help the kids know that they're seen. And the number one thing I always go back to is using proper pronouns for someone is suicide prevention. And it's essential that we as a school district honor our students and recognize them for who they are. And we're doing that.
I also just want to thank you for your reading of those kind remarks, and also for reminding us that Stonewall, that the Pride movement was started as a result of the Stonewall riots in 1969, when maybe a few of us were here, including me. I love my trans and LGBTQ family members, colleagues, and friends, and I'm really happy to support this today. And also, to your point about the suicide prevention, the pronouns are important, and I'm proud to be connected to a district that values diversity in this way.
Yeah, I'll just add thank you for your comments, Dr. Adams, and the rest of the board. This is an incredibly important resolution in today's environment. It's personal for a lot of people. And I'll just second the comments about being in a district that does value this, right, and that puts it forward and centers it is really important. And there's a lot going on in the community and the nation that is pretty ugly, and it's important that we push back on that, and that we actually demonstrate what inclusion means and what pride means, and that everyone has a safe space. So thank you for your words. Thank you for this proclamation. Any final comments? Kara, any public comment tonight?
No.
Great. The board will now vote on Resolution 6717, recognizing June as Pride Month. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Student Representative McMahon?
Yes.
Any abstentions? Resolution 6717 is approved by a vote of 7-0, with Student Representative McMahon voting yes. Thank you. Next up, Student Representative McMahon. Time for your report.
Thank you.
You should show off your new fashion accessory.
Okay.
So Byrony received this gift from the DSC, correct? And this is her new fashion accessory, and so
No,
I think
yes.
we should
It's
celebrate it with
very
her.
Cool.
Very cool.
And hopefully something will continue for the other student reps after me. First, I want to say Happy Pride Month to everyone, and I think it was great that we talked about, obviously, there are a lot of ugly things happening in the nation, but I think it's so great that we are taking that we are not, obviously, in alignment with those ugly things that are happening, but at the same time, obviously, our students, our queer students, still experience a lot of isolation, a lot of hate, a lot of vitriol, and so I think that in this time, it's important to celebrate, and it's also important to do that in revolution and resistance to the hate and the ongoing trauma that still occurs for our queer students in this district. And I know that we're moving towards a better place, but just want to recognize the experiences that those students still have today. Also, tonight is actually my last school board meeting, so I feel very strange. I think that's probably the best way to put it. I feel very strange. This year has been so amazing, and I was watching, obviously, all the other student reports of the last meetings that have gone on. And we have a really long meeting tonight, so I'm going to try to keep it short. I'm really proud to have been part of this time with PPS, and I know there will be so many more amazing student reps to come and so much progress, but I'm just so grateful to get to share this time with everyone and to get to spend time in community. I've got to visit schools this year, and I've got to visit summer programs this year, and I've gotten to meet with students and to grow the district student council and to grow our outreach. And I think that it's meant so much to me to be a part of that growth and that movement towards a better PPS. And so I think that's all I can say. I'm just so incredibly grateful to get to be part of this time with each of you and to get the opportunity to do this job. There's many times, I'm sure, that I took it for granted, in ops of being like, oh, this is so hard. But I just really appreciate it because it is a really special thing to get to be in a job like this. And only one student gets to do it every year, and it's really meant the world to me. So thank you to everyone who supported me and inspired me. Actually, Stephen Peterson, one of the community members that reached out to me, I emailed you saying that I was going to do this, so I just want to say thank you to you too. And to all the teachers and the people that were there. It means so much, and again, I'm just so incredibly grateful, so thank you, everyone. And Frankie is going to do a significantly better job than me next year, so I look forward to seeing all the progress that she will make and the opportunities she will create and the voice that she will provide to this body, because I think she's an amazing person.
I want to just say I've really loved serving with you, and wondering how long you're going to be in town, because you haven't done everything until you've stuffed math packets in for summer learning. Hopefully you'll have a chance to do that this summer.
Well, I'll just add, thank you. And I know the rest of the board may want to say some things as well, but it's been a real pleasure to serve with you. I just love the voice you bring every single time, and every single time you say anything, it makes me think, and it makes me think really hard about, what we're doing and how we're doing it. And so it's been really valuable. And the way you also started with appreciations in your student reports, and the way you advocated for the student voice. And, you did it very directly with me, and you said, my student report should not be in the middle or at the end of this meeting. It should be right up front. And that's a really positive change that you brought that I hope that we're able to keep moving forward. So it's been a pleasure. We do have a small token for you, but we're also, because we all just arrived, are in the middle of signing it, so we'll get it to you in a second. Anyway, anyone else? Want to add?
I'll say Terry goodbye. Byrony, you have been such an unbelievable asset. Usually, to my mind, with the most insightful comments on whatever the issue at hand is. I think back in particular to our session that we had on security with all of our partners from the city, including the mayor and the DA and this county, and all the players. And you were the strongest voice in that room to my ear, and you had the most insightful comments, and we're really holding people accountable and explaining the trauma and the fear that students live with, and just worrying about conditions around our schools. So you have a strong voice, and you're not afraid to use it, and we have all benefited so much. So I'm personally, I'm going to really miss you.
I'm gonna miss catching up on all the hot Cleveland gossip.
I'd just like to say how much I truly appreciate your consistent focus on the students, consistently pushing us to think about the students, to rethink how we think, and pushing the status quo, and that has been insightful. I'm looking forward to what your next steps are and what you do now with this. Everything that you have thought about, you said, I'd like to do this, and you put it out in the atmosphere, and then all of a sudden it happened. You said, I'd like to do this, and you put it out in the atmosphere, and then all of a sudden it happened. I'm excited to see and looking forward to what else you put out into the atmosphere that you're going to make happen, because you're very strong-willed, very strong-minded, and very focused on what it is that you're trying to do. And I know that our city, our state, this world is going to be better because of you. So keep being you.
So I could say all the things everybody just said because they're true, and I've seen it and witnessed it. We've sort of been on the same circuit this year. I don't know, the political events, going down to Salem to lobby on behalf of school funding, and I guess so. I'm going to be forward-looking, and oftentimes when we send off, since I've sent off 10 student reps in the past, often it's like, and in the future you're going to be a leader. You have the skills, but like you are a leader right now, and I'm so excited for our community because I know that you're not going to go somewhere else and take those amazing skills you have, but you're going to put them to work right here in our community, and that makes me so happy because I know we're going to be really well served, and that when this generation, whatever you decide to do, when somebody's ready to pass the baton, you're going to be more than ready, and we are going to be the beneficiaries of it. So good luck, and just continuing to be the person that you are and the leader you are.
And I should say, now that I'm not student rep anymore, if there's any government agencies out there looking for an intern or a student something, I'm here, completely available.
Let's talk.
Barney, and I'll keep it short. You've not only been an inspiration for your fellow students and classmates, but you've been an inspiration to me as well. The way that you lean into your beliefs, the way you lean into, the advocating for our students has been a example even for myself. And so I just want to thank you for that. And I know whatever you do later on, if you're going to run for anything, you have my vote and support.
And phone number.
And number.
Thanks. Next up, we turn to public comment. So before we begin, let me just review quickly the guidelines for public comment. First, thank you very much for being here tonight and providing your comments. Our board office may follow up on any board-related issues that are raised during public testimony. We do request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. And if you have any additional materials or items you'd like to provide to the board or the superintendent, you can email those to publiccomment, all one word, at pps.net, publiccomment@pps.net. When you begin your comments, please clearly state your name and spell your last name, and you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll hear a sound after 3 minutes, at which point we would just appreciate it if you conclude your comments. Ms. Bradshaw, who do we have signed up for public comment?
We have Moto McChesney.
Welcome back. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me. There we go. Good evening, board members. For the record, my name is Mona McChesney, MOTOMCCHESNEY. I am a student at Benson Polytechnic High School.
Benson.
Go Astros.
Go Astros.
A student reporter for AM 1450 KBPS Portland, and the founder of the Benson Computer and Physical Security Club. Okay. That part. It's been 4 months since I last testified, and I have some more information regarding some of the issues that I had previously raised about having master keys and badges to the schools. But tonight, I'm not going to be talking about that. Tonight is about the district and the lack of follow-through that I've seen in a lot of the stuff that I've been involved in. As a student reporter for AM 1450, I got the opportunity to go to Bonneville Dam, and this isn't directly related, but during the story that I was spearheading, I had the opportunity to interview the security officer for the Portland district, which encompasses all of Oregon. And she said something regarding security, and this applies not just to security, but anything else, and it'll apply for me, I think, for the rest of my life as I approach anything. The security site specialists know the sites, better than the guards do. The guards know it better than they do, and the employees know it better than the guards do, knowing the farther down you get, the closer to the areas, the more that people know about the specific spaces. This principle applies not just to security, but everything else as well. And what I've noticed is from the policies that you are enacting, you don't necessarily understand the direct schools. And that's not an attack on anyone specifically. That is, and I've had the privilege of meeting some incredible individuals among you. The issue lies without your attempt to try to get student involvement. And what I mean by that is I think most students don't understand that they can simply show up to a board meeting. When talking to most students, they don't understand that they can just show up and listen, and who genuinely need a lot of the policies you are enacting. How long has it been since most of you were in a school as a student or a staff member? Like I said.
Long time.
Okay. You don't. That's where the principle comes in. I think that you come in and you see all these smiling faces and you see the school not necessarily for what they are to actually day to day. You see what people kind of want you to see. I didn't hear anything from the district about talking about master keys until I ended up on the Lars Larson show. And then the next day, I had multiple people interested in talking to me from the district. Nothing before that. And I don't find that you truly do the right thing in a lot of cases unless you're pressured by outside sources. You claim credit for your students' work in multiple cases that I've seen, and then you undermine the efforts of the students after they create it. And then sometimes you even punish them for creating it and then proceed to still use it. This photo that was passed around, and I will wrap this up as fast as I can. This photo was passed around. That is from the shooting at Franklin High School in January. I was part of the team that recorded the video that was used by all the news outlets in the city of Portland. We were not recognized as somebody who was there. We never received any communication from the district after the shooting. The only response we got was, you have to take the video down, and you're not allowed to talk about it. That's the response I got from the district about this video. Individual members of the team took the video, and that's how it ended up in the news media hand. And the video is publicly accessible for the general public on my website, pps.wtf/video. And it's about 60 seconds, and it is the video that was used by all news outlets. The general public, if you have any comments, you are welcome to email me, and I'm happy to answer any of them. press@pps.wtf, or my website, schoolconcerns.com. Thank you for your time. Any questions?
Great. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you.
Stacy Ozer.
Welcome. Thanks for being here.
My name is Stacy Ozer, O-Z-E-R. Distinguished board members, my name is Stacy Ozer, and I have a garden at Harrison Park Community Garden, which is south of Harrison Park School on Southeast 87th, 1 block north of Division, the J District. Last September, one school morning, I was harvesting my bean seeds when a group of 6 Chinese women and 2 men came into the garden with a Chinese woman who has a garden there. She was excitedly pointing to her plants. A couple of the people came over to me, and one of the women spoke English and asked about my beans. They asked to try them, and I shared the beans and seeds with them. They inquired about having garden space. They said their children go to Harrison Park School. Within a couple of days, they busily cleared the overgrown weeds and blackberries and repaired the garden beds, brought in compost, and prepared their space for this spring. They were thrilled, and seeds were exchanged. A Portland policeman who has had a garden there for several years asked last year if his 12-year-old son could clear a bed to use. Absolutely, was my response, and I told him to contact Monica Flesher at Portland Public Schools. Sid brought his son and his 2 slightly younger stepsons to clear more blackberries and weeds, and they rebuilt another 3 beds, 1 for each son. They planted lettuce and a variety of vegetables to harvest this spring. It was fantastic to see the young people excited to grow their own food. Now these garden spaces and the approximate 60 other garden beds and plots are overgrown with high weeds. The gardeners I just told you about do not have gardens and are not growing produce as expected because PPS notified us that the garden was closing. The bean seeds, such as these, are going to waste because there's no space to plant the seeds. We were told the garden must close because of the school remodel and the garden would be torn out to make space for construction equipment. However, there is an entire block available. There are 2 gated locked entrances to the garden. A simple solution is to put up a fence to separate the 2 areas. In fact, the construction equipment will be much safer if there are gardeners present in the evening and weekends as eyes and ears over the area. A side note, in the last 2 years, I've stopped a reported car theft and menacing at the school grounds just by being there in the garden by calling the police. I was told by Dana White, PPS Real Estate Department, that the garden would close permanently because PPS is not in the garden business. However, that is not entirely true because there are other PPS properties with community gardens. Grant High School is one, and when Grant was closed for remodel, not only was the community garden kept intact and active, but the garden was expanded. I discovered the Harrison Park Community Garden about 5 years ago when it was operated by Outgrowing Hunger. It's a very unique garden in that it is primarily immigrants and non-English speaking people who grow produce there. Over the years, several of the gardeners have been parents of children at Harrison Park School and residents of the apartments next door and across the street. Last year, 80% of the garden was worked by immigrants and 61% of them do not speak English. There were several Chinese families, both Cantonese and Mandarin, people who migrated from Taiwan, Vietnam, Dubai, Mexico, and Ukraine. Much of what is grown in this garden are vegetables from their home and countries and are not available for purchase in Portland. Here are some Chinese chives that you can have for you to enjoy that a Chinese man gave me to grow. 2 years ago, Outgrowing Hunger decided to move out of the garden. The plan was for Portland Parks and Rec to take it over. However, I was told that this did not occur because PPS decided to experiment with operating the garden itself, and it was assigned to Monica Flesher to manage. I volunteered to manage the garden and take care of all the day-to-day tasks, much like volunteer garden managers for Portland Parks and Rec. I stepped up because of my intense fondness of the garden, the people, and the unique produce grown here. Now, however, there is an even better management plan. Portland Parks and Rec has again stated a desire to manage the garden and will do so if it is kept open. In early May,
Ms. Ozer, could you wrap up?
Okay, I'll just get
Thank
to the
you.
last sentence, or last paragraph. It's apparent there's outcry from the residents and community. Over 400 people have signed an online petition in addition to about 60 people signing the hard copies, and you have copies of those. There's no need to close the garden. A plan is in place to continue to have it professionally managed, just as Grant High School is by Portland Parks and Rec. I implore you to work with the contractor to utilize the adequate space for staging the construction equipment on the west end of the garden property and to maintain the garden with a fence to divide the two activities. Currently, the
Ms.
garden.
Thank you
Okay,
for your comments. Really appreciate them tonight. Yeah.
thank you. Thank
May
you
I-
for your
may I
time.
provide
Would
a-
any of you like to have some Chinese chives?
Would love some chives.
I would love some chives.
And I would love some bean seeds. May I have I just clarified, may I make a comment?
Yeah.
Because there's so many people advocating. Thank you for your advocacy. I'm a huge proponent of urban gardening and was in urban gardening for years myself and worked under Charles Jordan, who convinced me to go to college because of urban gardening. We got notice today that the Portland Parks and Recreation is indeed, they have the capacity and the interest in taking on the management of the garden after the construction's done. So it's got maintenance now, which is a great thing. The garden will be able to be restored. I think the last thing, and they'll be providing water as well. So I just want to let you know that it's a temporary closure, and maybe what's built back is better. So thank you for your advocacy. And this is from the Portland Parks and Recreation, the Community Gardens Program Manager, Laura Nemi.
Yeah, I got a similar email this afternoon notifying me that from some advocacy that happened.
So one of the questions, well, actually, one of the things I was going to say, and ask the superintendent, not at tonight's meeting, but to provide the board with, because again, I just learned about the issue last week when we started getting some emails, just provide the board with an update on what is sort of happening in the plan and whether there are any alternatives. Sounds like there's some other stuff going on here as well, so.
Especially with all the really cool stuff that's going to be happening at Harrison Park, that with the opening of the middle school and the major investments the district's making, it seems like it's a perfect complement and a partnership with Portland Parks if they're willing to do it.
It's also a second garden site. So there's actually a garden site on site that has a curriculum with it, and then there's the community garden site. So, and yeah, bean seeds are very hard to get right now, by the way. I've looked in 3 stores now.
So it sounds like we'll get some updates in the future. Thank you, Superintendent. Kara, who's up next?
Rand Keller.
Hello, I'm Rand Kaller, last name Kaller. I'm a former nurse, current medical student, and proud spouse of one of your amazing first grade teachers at Scott Elementary. I'm here to talk to you today about lead, asbestos, and heat in schools throughout your district. I hope my presence shows that this is not an issue isolated to schools, administrators, and teachers. This is a public health concern and should be viewed as such. It is my understanding that the current plan is mitigating exposures to lead through the use of water coolers and abating heat with standing fans, and a vague plan of eventually replacing these buildings sequentially in the next few decades. I'm here to tell you that that is not enough. We cannot provide unsafe environments for our students and pretend there are easy workarounds that will prevent long-term harm when the very water students wash their hands in is contaminated. If there's lead in your pipes, there is lead in your students. Lead, even in the smallest quantity, leads to learning and behavior problems, hearing and speech deficits, and slowed growth in children. The list goes on. There is no safe amount of lead, and the effect is cumulative. Lead is not all. Asbestos can result in lung thickening and inflammatory disease and chronic scarring. It is also a known risk factor for lung and throat cancers. Seeing the outcome from the medical end, I wish fervently that we had the opportunity that you have in front of you to stop this before it happens to anyone else. Lastly, heat. You wouldn't leave your dog in a hot car. Why are you leaving your students in a hot classroom? More than just distracting and uncomfortable, studies of standardized testing show that as much as 1 degree hotter classroom can reduce the year's measurable learning by approximately 1%. This feels like a damning statement when so much testing is done toward the end of the school year when classroom temperatures have been seen to reach the mid-90s. This all stems from old buildings and poor infrastructure, which has needed to be replaced for more than a decade. Where will the money come from for this? I can't pretend I know that. What I can tell you is that renovations would be an upstream investment with significant downstream payoff. Avoiding the fallout of behavioral, cognitive, physical side effects of current exposures is a clear benefit. But beyond that, there's a preponderance of evidence that students do better in healthier environments and perform better in school absent of any other intervention. That is an outcome worth investing in. It is no secret that all these issues affect the poorest neighborhoods and at-risk minority groups the most, as well as the teachers and staff who choose to serve them. Children are enduring these exposures in early formative years. Teachers may spend their whole careers exposed. Time and time again, we've seen that teachers are a limited and precious resource. We ask them for their time, their hearts, their own money for classroom supplies. We shouldn't ask them to give us their health too. You have the opportunity to say that these conditions are unacceptable and to set a powerful precedent to raise the standards for learning environments the way your teachers set and raise standards for their students every day. I hope you do it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Nikki Kaufman.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Nikki Kaufman, Kaufman. I am the PPS Head Start bookkeeper, and before that I was a data clerk at Franklin High School. I'm here because I know in my heart that an injury to one is an injury to all. During our current contract negotiations, the district council has used our low to free cost of health insurance as an excuse to not pay us livable wages. What they don't seem to realize or care about is that while our members are fortunate to have affordable health insurance, there are many who simply cannot afford to take time off from work to go to the doctor, or they don't have the transportation means to get to the doctor when they need to. Many of us continue working while ill or injured because we can't afford the co-pays, and we know we'll be leaving our team even more short-staffed in our absence than we are already. There's a red X in the audience for an injury sustained to staff members in the course of their work. I'm also here to read some testimonies provided by members who are not here right now. I work 3 hours every day after school just to stay afloat. I love my job and work hard to help students be successful, but I don't have any savings or safety net. I've developed chronic health conditions from the stress of my job, and I've seen incredible abuse and neglect of children in special education due to understaffing and poor training, often in moments of crisis when staff were escalated or injured and needed to leave but had to stay due to staffing and lack of substitutes. There was no follow-up done because we didn't have a teacher. Our NCI training does not prepare people because it is shortened by half of what it is supposed to be. Give us the full training. Another one says, from what I've seen, the educational assistants are doing paraeducator work and the paraeducators are simply thrown to the wolves. Another one says, I'm dependent on charity and food pantries because of my paycheck. Most of my paycheck goes to rent. I love my job, but this is unsustainable. The last one says, I've been a library assistant for 2 years. Last year I got laid off. This year I'm still waiting to hear if I have a job in the fall. I've been told that I definitely won't have my full-time hours. PPS doesn't ban books, they just cut their library staff. Those are just some of the testimonies that we've gathered from PFSP members around the district during the course of our work organizing our union for better pay, working conditions, and better staffing. We're here tonight to show that we're prepared to fight for those things. Our students' futures depend on it, and our dignity demands it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alasia Lauer. Alejandro Cielo is virtual. Move them in.
Hello.
Hi, welcome, Alejandro.
Hello, Superintendent Guadalupe, school board directors, council large. Oh, and I guess I should acknowledge Student Representative McMahon. My name is Alexander, or in Spanish, Alejandro, last name Levine, Levine. I couldn't be here tonight because I'm still at college, but I would never miss this moment. Tonight, I want to briefly touch on some accomplishments and congratulate someone who did one big, amazing job this year. Someone who's grown as a leader and is a dear friend of mine. Byrony, I'm incredibly proud of you. This year, just like others, I know we're hard. You faced unique challenges. You guided the district student council to meet successfully on a weekly basis, passing resolutions, holding meaningful conversations that all led to the district student council student summit, which definitely had more people there this year than the years I was in PPS. As a PPS grad and community member, I saw from the outside looking in that student voice was being represented by you. You were fighting the good fight, and that's a win for this district. For those that don't know, McMahon started this job role in a sprint. Every moment last summer when I'd call her and she'd say, sorry, I'm busy, can't talk, I'm at a summer works program or a PPS internship, checking it out. McMahon put in the work and she showed that she cared. She speaks at swearing in ceremonies and graduations alike, all for the pursuit and fight of student and educational rights. She showed up to Salem this year and showed the state legislature that they need to fund education, and they did. That work is being seen by many after she's visited nearly every high school and middle school and elementary school. She showed that student voice matters and is at the forefront of every issue. She's made profound impacts on not only community members, but proved that student voice mattered when she was in the rooms with congresspeople, senators, Governor Kotek, and even President Biden. She's had unwavering support for what students think in school, no matter her personal opinion. She advocates for it. As the PAT president said last meeting, she's a fierce advocate for all students, speaking up when adults don't. As Congresswoman Bonamici said in an email to her, I'm inspired by your commitment to make schools stronger and better for all. I think those two quotes sum it up. It's the joy that I share in those two quotes, that watching you fiercely advocate to make this system better for all. So congratulations on an amazing year full of amazing accomplishments. I'm so proud of you. In Washington, watch out. I'll be there loud and proud when McMahon gets sworn in. Thank you.
Xander, that was awesome. Thank you. And good luck with finals. And you forgot to mention the TikTok videos.
Amazing job all around. And the District Student Council, Parker, Myris, you did a great job too.
Next, we have Sabrina Danielson, also virtual.
Hello, my name is Sabrina Danielson, Danielson. I want to thank you for your time and attention today. I have been working for PPS in the special education department for about 5 years now, as a behavior support person. I'm here to talk to you about the toxic and retaliatory culture that I've experienced and that I've observed that Portland Public Schools has really nurtured, especially against their neurodivergent and people of color, educators and students. I'm speaking virtually because I'm currently on forced administration leave or teacher jail because I have been labeled as disrespectful and harassing. This is the third effort in the last week to remove me from supporting my students in schools since I have started advocating my clinical view of what is outdated and in some cases harmful in our educational and ABA practices. These efforts have ranged from trying to force my extended FMLA, a surprise evaluation that has no observations or observation minutes on it, and now this administration leave. For those who are unfamiliar with me, I am also a neurodivergent human that has ASD and ADHD. And due to these disabilities, I have a very different social communication style. I don't see hierarchy. I think there's nothing wrong with asking questions and speaking plainly. And I will not engage in small talk at forced potlucks. Since I have spoken up against the practices, I have experienced what I feel is isolation, exclusion, and behavior reflective of bullying from some coworkers and HR people. The very department that is supposed to advocate for students with disabilities the same as me are the ones engaging in some of this discriminatory behavior. When I asked for support navigating the disagreements, because I know I speak plainly and have this disability, I was led down a really horrible path that hasn't even been resolved. This toxic work environment doesn't just hurt me and other neurodivergent employees, but it really hurts our community and our students. When our employees aren't treated with respect and dignity, they cannot perform their best work, and this ultimately harms the students they serve. Furthermore, when our district continues to fail to create an inclusive work environment, we are sending a message to our community that we do not value diversity, which our data has already shown has led to a lack of trust and support from our community. We have to do better. We have to actively work to create a culture of inclusivity and acceptance in our workplace. And this means providing accommodations and supports to our neurodivergent employees, educating our fellow colleagues about neurodiversity, and actively challenging the discriminatory behavior when we see it happening. Since our urban collaborative data is showing that PPS currently has almost double the national average of special education, it is becoming more and more imperative to me that we start building this community now, where everyone, regardless of their neurodivergent or POC status, is valued, respected, and given the opportunity to thrive. We must all actively work together to create an inclusive and welcoming workplace that values diversity and supports all of our employees and students. By doing so, I think we can truly create a stronger and more successful district for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to call Alicia Lauer again. Okay, that concludes. We have signed up for public comment, general public comment.
Great. Thank you again for your comments. And if you have, please feel free to connect with our Senior Board Manager, Roseanne Powell, if you have something specifically to follow up on with the board or board office. Next up, I believe we have comments from the Portland Association of Teachers and President Bonilla. Welcome, President Bonilla. Nice to have you with us.
Hello, Superintendent, Chair Scott, Vice Chair Hollins, School Board, Student Representative McMahon. For the record, as always, my name is Angela Bonilla, Bonilla, and I want to start with kudos. So first, a kudos to all those who advocated and to PPS for changing the decision to allow all students who need access to the Summer Academy to access it. We no longer have that barrier of certain percentage students need to reach, so students that need it can access it. So that's really great. Shout out to our PFSP members who work here at MPEC as security. They did a really great job of keeping us safe and clearing the hallways when we had over 700 educators here at the last board meeting. And also thank you to Roseanne Powell for reaching out and pre-planning to have an outdoor viewing area today in case of a crowd. A lot of really great work. Also thank you to Dr. Effie Greathouse and the community for advocating for those Medify MA1000 filters that OHA offered, and PPS for accepting those. That's going to be great to have more sites with increased airflow and clean air. So today I want to talk a little bit about budgets, audits, and I want to specifically speak to the assertion by PPS's communications team that I'm spreading misinformation about the funds that PPS has. So when the communications team states to the news, PPS is fully, quote, PPS is fully aware of the misinformation campaign led by PAT, Portland Association of Teachers. Our board policy requires the district to maintain 5% of our annual funding in reserve, which is what we are doing. We will continue to be fiscally responsible and work with integrity and transparency while centering our students in all of our decisions. It really stings because PAT is not me or Jackie or our association reps. It's every educator in this district. And it's pretty gross that PPS would stoop so low to say that our educators who are here, employed by them, tasked to educate our city, are spreading misinformation. It is false. So I want to make some things clear. Of course, after I leave the podium, y'all have the right to call up everyone from PPS management to dispute what I'm saying, and that's fine. That's your prerogative. However, I want to remind this board, you're elected to be the voice of the community and the public, not to enforce what the superintendent or the communications team says. Last meeting, I felt very frustrated watching y'all discuss budgets from the back, talking about one of the funds but not the others, and using the same metaphors about budgeting for our paychecks and how an increase in funds doesn't mean that there's also doesn't mean much when there's also an increase in costs. I work here. We get paid once a month. I know what budgeting is. Many of us divide our paychecks for our 10-month salary into 12 months so that we can pay for our rent over the summer. And that's while costs go up for us too. So I understand how budgets work. I also understand that PPS presented information to our bargaining team about the general fund, Fund 100, but not the special revenues fund, Fund 200. This is like having money from 2 jobs going into 2 checking accounts and only talking about one. So I thought I'd provide some clarification and some understanding that I've come to after talking with our OEA bargaining coordinator, whose job it is to analyze school district audits and to understand and calculate how much money the district can expect to receive from the state. And I'm sure y'all have that information too, so I don't think anything I'll say is a surprise. But there are 2 issues that I want to touch on: the idea of budgets versus audits, as well as ending fund balances. So budgets are the moral document. That's the dream, right? They show where we intend to spend our funds. But audits are the informational document. That's where we actually spend our money. And we've gotten so involved in these budget conversations, but now I'm learning that the real information is really in the audits. So here is what I've learned from our comprehensive audits from PPS. The millions that I'm calling out in the PPS budget come from information obtained in the comprehensive audit from PPS for the year 21-22. The audit states that PPS's total expenditures in the general fund were $689,584,000, but there was a $98,804,000 amount as an ending fund balance. So this $98 million was what was left over. For the same year, the district cut 90 classroom educators while increasing FTE across the district. But that's not all. The special revenue fund, the 200 fund, the funds that include grants and monies from the state and federal government, where the Student Success Act money goes, that audit states that PPS's total expenditures were $181,625,000, but had $35,069,000 as an ending fund balance. And this is all despite an increase in costs. Again, this comes down from PPS's own comprehensive audit for last year. So we also know that the budget is based off of the current budget that is proposed is based off of the original state school fund budget of $9.9 billion. The governor has committed, and we're all waiting for Republicans to come back to work so that the work can be done, to passing a state school fund of $10.2 billion. So when those funds do come in, will PPS commit to funding student-facing positions, to bringing back the online learning academy, to listening to the priorities of the public and reduce our class sizes across the city, to increase the number of folks who can work on our ventilation or electrical? Next, I want to talk about the ending fund balance. So total expenditures and ending fund balances have increased year after year since 2017. Again, from the comprehensive financial report, the audit. We have gotten more funds in our state school fund allocation year after year. We have spent more year after year, and we have had more money in our ending fund balance year after year. We have more money, and we're spending less of it. So where does that money go? So I would really appreciate not having the misinformation accusations in the news. The reason I'm asking where the funds are going is because our district continues to present slides that state we have an ending fund balance for 22-23 of only $50 million, but our beginning fund balance for 23-24 will be $94 million. The ending fund balance of one year is the starting fund balance for the following year, and if it's not, where is that money coming from? Sometimes it seems like a shell game where there's, funding balances, contingency, Fund 100, Fund 200. And we also know that the Oregon School Board Association states that a district of our size only needs a 5% reserve, and our 21-22 ending fund balance for the general fund was 14.33% of that fund. In 21-22, the ending fund balance for the special revenue 200 fund was 19.31% of that fund. These are both above that recommended 5 and the 10% of the board's policy. Why and where is it going? Again, the Community Budget Review Committee made it clear when y'all have the funds, you increasingly spend it on increased management instead of in positions or pay for PAT, PFSP, SEIU, ATU, DCTU, DCTU, IBEW. The tone PPS has taken or has chosen to take around our budget and our educators is unfortunate and a reflection of our experience at the bargaining table. We have had over 150 days of direct bargaining with PPS management, and that's not including the bargaining we did around Article 9 and student safety since October. And we have asked the state for mediation because we still remain far apart on our members' biggest bargaining priorities. And not only that, I feel like we're far apart in acknowledging the truth that's written in black and white in the comprehensive audits. So I want to make sure that we're actually on the same page and we're communicating so that we can come to a resolution. And I don't want to attribute to malice what can be attributed to ignorance. So maybe y'all didn't know that these special revenue funds have increased dramatically since 2017. I have it all compiled across since 2017 here for y'all. And it's not just due to ESSER funds. Maybe we're getting this view presented to us because it is a bargaining year. But either way, it feels like another way to demonize our educators who have fought against every instinct of self-preservation since 2020 and continue to come back to work every day. We want to work here. We want to make it feel good to learn at PPS. We hope that a state mediator can help us find common ground, common understanding, and lead to an agreement that actually gives students and educators the respect and the support that they deserve. And I hope we can have more conversations about all these other pieces in the audits and the reality of our financial position, because I want to make sure that we are listening to the public and to our community and investing in their priorities, as they are the ones who live here and have lived here and continue to send their students here. Meanwhile, we know what our central office looks like, and it's often a revolving door. I hope these folks stay because we've been doing a lot of really good work, but I also have to make sure that I'm not ignorant to the experience I've had at this district. So let's try to get on the same page, and let's make sure we're not spreading nasty rumors about misinformation coming from the folks who educate your kids. Thank you.
Angela, you want to hang on for a second? You have a lot of supporters, so I have to wait for the acknowledgement. There's probably some other times and other conversations we can have. I think I guess maybe the question I want to ask, it feels to me like at the heart of what you're saying is that you don't trust the numbers that the district is giving you. And you and I had this conversation almost a year ago. I've talked to some other folks on PAT, and I will tell you that it's frustrating. And it's frustrating because it feels like underlying what you're saying is that, I use the word lie, but is that you really believe you're being lied to. And that's not a good place where we can collaborate moving forward. And I will tell you what I had hoped going into this year, because last year I was really frustrated because, we had a difficult budget year. There were fewer resources than we wanted, and we made some reductions. And what we were told by people in the community, and we heard that from members of PAT and from PAT leadership, was there's money, you're not telling us about it. And I'm hearing very much the same thing today. And I guess maybe we're not going to solve it here today. Maybe what I'll just pose is, how do we get to a place where we can agree on the numbers and then actually start having the hard conversations about where it goes? Because you raised some really important points, and points that board members have echoed in our questions to the superintendent about what is happening with admin staff, right? And there are some disagreements there about those numbers too, or what's happening about certain programs like OLA. Those are really important questions. We're not going to get to those questions if we don't agree on the number. And I will tell you, my frustration with your communication to your members, I'll be really blunt, was last time you were here, you said, the district is sitting on $90 million ending fund balance and they're not spending it. But we are spending it. The budget we are proposing to adopt today drops that down to $50 million. And so it was just a weird, like just kind of one of those facts, like you're saying, like, you know, the sky's orange. I'm like, no, the sky's blue. It's not. And so I'm like, that feels like a waste of our time. And I think you would agree. I think that's why you're here testifying about that, to move on. And I guess maybe I would just ask, how do we get to a point? Because I don't believe staff are lying to you, and I don't believe the superintendent's lying to you. I do believe we need to spend some time making sure that we're really transparent about where all those numbers and funds and figures come from.
Absolutely, and I am more than happy to share the information I've gotten from our budget analyst at OEA, because this is, I can make sure that y'all get a copy of this, but our audit data from 2017 to 2020 is very clear that we have continued to have an increase in funds and an increase in ending fund balance. Those aren't numbers I'm making up, those are numbers coming from the audit. The questions I'm asking is, where exactly is that going? And those are the questions that we're not getting answered, and that's why the frustration is coming from the community. Because it feels like, yes, I'm getting a slideshow, again, showing me these tables, but those tables don't clearly explain the data that's on them. And it's been and we brought it up in bargaining too, it's very difficult to say that data is presented because this is public information, you can find it. And as an educator, I understand that it's not about the information existing, it's about the mode in which it is transmitted to those who want to understand it. And so when we have slideshows that are showing statewide declines in enrollment instead of PPS-specific declines in enrollment, when we have numbers that aren't explained as to how we got to that number on this table, it makes it very difficult to just say, okay, I'll just trust what they're saying, because we want to trust and verify, right? And so I understand the frustration around where is this money? We're talking about $98 million in a ending fund balance, and we are draining that down. But we're not saying we have $98 million in an ending fund balance in those documents. What the slideshow we received from the bargaining table said there were. I'll pull it up, but it said that there was something like 40, 48, and then 50 for the starting fund balance, which just doesn't make sense to me. And so that's why my questions are, where is it going? What's going on? I've emailed those questions to the CFO, and I know he's super busy and trying to catch up on everything. And I still don't have an answer, right? Yeah. And so I come here to ask those questions that's what most of us come here to do, is to ask the questions we've asked others, haven't gotten a response on. And so we come here to ask that y'all ask those questions for us. Yeah. And so, I want to come from a place of truth and data so that we can start in the same place and move from there. But what we have seen as a trend across the state as well in other districts is that there is this oh my gosh, we're at this precipice, there is no funding. And we've seen an increase in those, it's all good, in those ending fund balances. So where is that funding going if we're getting 5% more in the second year of a 2-year biennium funding, right? There's a lot of questions. Yeah. Okay. And it feels like the questions aren't being answered when they're asked.
Yeah, and thank you. Thank you for asking them. And maybe when I'm done being chair in 2 weeks, I'll have a little more time. And we can talk about translating, some of those numbers and make sure we're on the same page with the information. So thank you. Thanks for being here.
I also have a shirt for Byrony, so.
Ooh, very nice. All right. Next up, Service Employees International Union has requested to speak this evening, and I believe Chris Walters is here. Thank you for being here. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me. And, thank y'all. And I'd like to get started. So, SEIU has now completed its 5th bargaining session with the district. We've just started to get responses and counter proposals from the district, which is great. So that starts our clock. And I want to talk a little bit about the bargaining process and what we're thinking about. Our objectives going into bargaining were twofold. First was to deal with some of the language in our contract. The contract language is ancient. For example, about 6 contracts ago, the district committed to moving from a once-a-month paycheck to twice-a-month paycheck, that this would happen over the course of that contract. It clearly did not. And that language stayed in the next contract, and the next one, and the next one. And so one of the things that we're looking for is to change the language from the district committing to do something that they clearly have not done over the previous contracts and just actually do it. Is that the difference between a twice-a-month paycheck and a once-a-month paycheck for someone just starting off means the difference between going potentially 4 weeks without seeing their first paycheck to 6 weeks, which is what it currently is. Some members of our union, or really anybody, if their date happens to come right after a pay period, that's 6 weeks that they're not getting paid. And that's a hardship. So we want to clear up language like that. That's part of our goal. There's a lot of really outdated language in our contract. And so far, the district's responses have been mostly no. They've agreed to clear up a few things, but most of our answers have just been a flat no. Or a, we'll talk about it, which, great, we've got plenty of time to talk about it. This is going to take a bit. The next thing that we're looking to do is talk about wages. That's, the big elephant in the room. It took us a while to come up with a number. And we did a lot of research. We used the MIT calculator for wages for the Portland area. And for example, a 2-parent, 2-child family needs about $28 an hour wage for each parent to live decently in the Portland area. So we took a lot of these numbers and we came up with $25 an hour as a starting wage, which as I alluded to, we did not come to this number lightly. This is not something that we just threw out there and said, yeah, let's go with this. We talked it out. We talked about the pros and the cons. We really looked at the market that we live in and the wages that are paid, and we felt that $25 is a fair amount to start with. And we wanted that to apply to custodians, to nutrition services assistants, and quite frankly, it should apply to paras, educational assistants, security, anybody who works for PPS. Because that's a fair wage for living in this city. It's not a cheap city. It's not the most expensive city. It's not LA or DC, but there are costs to living in the city, and management responses was obviously no. And they pointed out that, for nutrition services assistants, we make more than, say, folks down in Salem or Centennial or what have you, but we're not competing with Salem or Centennial for employees. We're competing with people actually in the city, restaurants that pay similar wages to us and then throw tips on top of that. Second graders are great with smiles, but they're not so great with tips. And high school students, I love y'all. I work in a high school, McDaniel High School, and I love the kids there. But y'all don't smile a whole lot and don't tip a lot. So that's where we're coming from. We've got a number of things that we're looking to change within the contract. Language around hazard pay, inclement weather, the idea, we currently have a grievance going to arbitration about the snow earlier this year where there was a state of emergency and lots of custodians were essentially put into danger. And we want to change that in the language. Again, so far the response has been no. But we're hoping to move that over time. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. I wanted to give you all an update from our side of the table. And yeah,
Great.
That's it. If you have any
Thanks.
questions, I'm happy to answer anything.
Thanks for being here.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Andrew, I have a quick question. Mr. Walters? Mr. Walters? I just had a quick question. I've asked PPS staff for a listing of all of our employees that currently make under $20 an hour across different bargaining units, but if you happen to have that information for SEIU, the number of your members and what the roles are, if you have that handy and you want to forward it along to us, I'd be interested in that, just by email.
We can provide you with that information. I know that all of our assistants, starting at $17.25 an hour, are under that number.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. Our leads are slightly over 20, so, and our custodians start at 19 something an hour. So probably about half of our union is under that $20.
Okay.
And that is also reflected, I should point out, in the turnover percentage. 26% of our nutrition services new hires are no longer with us from this year. 38% of custodial new hires didn't make it a full year.
Yeah.
38%. The private sector, it's about 10%. So we're wasting a lot of money in HR resources on people who aren't sticking around. But yeah, we'll get you that information.
Thank you.
Thank
I'd
you.
appreciate it.
I was going to ask if, adding on to that data, if you have a number, a lot of times when you're not making the minimum to afford to rent an average apartment in any given city, the members need to go and use food banks and other supports or have a second job. If you have, I don't know if you have that information as a percentage, or if you could do an anonymous survey so people could report.
That would have.
I would be interested in knowing what that.
That would be interesting information. I don't know the logistics of getting that, but if we can, we will. But yes, a lot of our members in our surveys have indicated they work second jobs. Most of our members are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of us are on the margins. And
Yeah. I would say like a survey where you can
Yeah.
anonymize the responses.
I will check with our folks and see about the feasibility of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walters. Appreciate you being here.
Under 25, that would be all of us. Well, all of us on nutrition services, for custodial, some of the heads are above that, but most are under.
Okay. Appreciate you being here.
Sure,
Thank you. Next up, the Portland Federation of School Professionals, and welcome President Patton. Thanks for being here.
Hi,
Hello.
I'm Michelle Batten, B-A-T-T-E-N. I'm the president of PFSP, the union that represents classified employees. This evening, I have brought with me John McDuffie, who is currently our field rep, but he is also president-elect, and will take over the leadership role come July 1st.
Congratulations.
Hello, Mr. McDuffie.
That's MacDuffee. No one ever spells it right, so you don't need to listen.
So I will start this evening. Throughout this school year, union leaders from across the district have come to speak before you with concerns about the employees we represent, the staffing crisis, a livable wage, and safety. I began the year by sharing with you the demographics of my own membership, PFSP. We are the most diverse represented workforce. 35% are non-white, 78% is female. Historically, a group of employees made up mostly of women and those of color does not receive the financial or career respect as those of the dominant society. We are not paid a livable wage, although over half of us have bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees. We are dismissed as less than, working for women's wages. PFSP is in bargaining with the district right now. We have demanded a livable wage, a wage that says one job should be enough. And I have with me a bunch of these signed platforms from all of the schools supporting our bargaining platform of one job should be enough. A wage that honors the dedication and hard work these diverse employees have earned as they support your most fragile students, your students with special needs, students learning English, students whose families have fled genocide, or students who live food and home insecure. Let them know how much you value them. Give them the resources to care for our own families, and show them the respect their work deserves. Tell them, we agree with you. One job should be enough. I want to share some remarks from my members. Nikki, who spoke earlier, grabbed some of them, but I have some more. A para for 23 years says the classroom I work in lost 4 staff over winter break, all of whom gave weeks of notice. Since then, we have had to use teacher subs to fill open para positions. A records clerk says, I have a medical condition that is exacerbated by extreme temperatures. We do not have air conditioning in our office, and I regularly get lightheaded at work. Another para says, we use damp paper towels to cool our kids down on hot days. The children in our classroom are mostly nonverbal and can't tell us when they are overheating, so we spray them with water on hot days or take them into the hallways for relief because our classroom doesn't have adequate air conditioning. Another para says, I depend on a second job and food pantries to help feed myself because most of my paycheck goes to rent. I haven't been able to buy myself new clothes this year. And if you remember some of our bargaining information, over 50% of our members do work a second job. I've developed chronic health conditions from the stress of my job and have seen that stress and neglect in children in special education due to understaffing and poor training. Things smarter than I am. Our NCI, which is like hold and de-escalation training, does not prepare people because it's been shortened by half of what it's supposed to be. Give us the full training. It used to be a full 2 days. It's now been condensed into 1. A year ago, some tiles were damaged in my classroom, and we were told by the custodian that it was an open asbestos pit, so it was covered with duct tape. The pit has been tripped over repeatedly by students and staff. If it's still there in September, I will not be returning. Another para says, I love the work I do. I just can't see being able to survive with the disrespectful pay long term. Another says, I have health insurance, but I often can't afford the transportation to get to my provider. Tomorrow is the last day of school, and Friday is the last day of work for the 192 classroom-based staff. As of right now, PFSP has 41 layoffs looming, 17 full layoffs and 14 partial, including 6 who've been cut to half-time, which means they will work twice as hard to get everything done in half the time. For 14 of those layoffs, this Friday will be their last day at Portland Public Schools. As I end my tenure as PFSP president and a 38-year career at PPS, I urge you, work with us to improve the working conditions of our employees. When working conditions improve, education improves. Be the kind of leaders our students and employees need. Thank you. And we also have statistics. about how many of our people make under $20 an hour.
If you can send that to us,
I
that'd
will.
be great. Thank you.
Yes, our step one EAs make a little over $16, and that's the group that when the preschool started last year, that the pre-K EAs had to get a stipend of $3.50 an hour because the state required that much more for a wage.
Great. Thank you.
I want to
Thanks
thank you
being
for
here.
your service. I'm sorry. I want to just thank you for 38 years. You must have started when you were very young.
Michelle, she took a break in that time too because she was let off during hard times economically for the district. So that 38 represents some other years too. We would like to thank the district for the help that we've received this year from Michelle Murr, the director of SPED, in talking about and developing plans to increase training for paraeducators and talking about helping to get more training for other staff that aren't SPED as well. We'd also like to thank Sharon Reese and the HR team for making sure that we were able to get new PFSP employees orientations. We've heard a lot of positive things from people at the central office too about how beneficial that is for everyone. We'd like to thank the superintendent and his staff for offering welcoming statements during those sessions too, so thank you very much. We have talked a lot about diversity, and I know that the school district really wants to go there. We have a lot of income diversity that isn't something that's talked about very much, and we hope that everybody can recognize that. During our most recent bargaining session, the district's representatives stated something to the effect of that over 50% of PFSP employees receive more than a poverty rate. That's disheartening. And then proposed 3%, 2.5%, and 2% COLA for those three following years. I just don't think that's the message that you want to send. And so I hope that we can work something out that is more positive and recognize these employees who work so hard, are frequently in danger, and are injured a lot. They should be paid more than just a wage that allows them to exist. So thank you very much for listening to us.
Thank you for being here. Okay, we are going to move on to board committee and conference reports. So are there any updates about board committees that folks would like to share at this time? I'm seeing shaking of heads. Nope. Okay. One thing, just sort of board business to add in terms of board member declarations for leadership. So just as a reminder, in May of 2021, the board adopted a process by which board members could be considered for board leadership positions. The resolution states that in order to be considered for a leadership position, board members must notify the current board manager in writing by June 1st if they plan to run for board leadership in the July election. Then at the first board meeting in June, which is tonight, the board chair will publicly confirm board members who are interested in serving in leadership. So I just wanted to let everyone know that as of that deadline, Vice Chair Hollins has declared his interest in being board chair next year. And then Director Green and incoming Director Eddie Wong have expressed interest in being vice chair. So again, we will have that vote at our first meeting, at July 11th board meeting, to elect leadership for the next year. Next up on our agenda is a report from the Climate Crisis Response Committee. So next up, we're going to hear from the Climate Crisis Response Committee in March of 2022. The board adopted the Climate Crisis Response, Climate Justice, and Sustainable Practices Policy. This policy includes a requirement for a Climate Crisis Response Committee to monitor the effectiveness of implementation, ensure transparency, and track the progress of initiatives needed to meet the policy. Tonight, we're pleased to have the committee to provide feedback on policy implementation so far, and I believe I'm welcoming committee members Jane Kamalt, Angela Long, and Charity Fain to provide a report, but maybe just one of you tonight, so welcome.
Sure, yeah. Thanks. Just give me me one moment. I'm going to share my screen.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And good evening to the board and Superintendent Guerrero and the student representative. Thanks for taking the time to hear our report tonight. I'm Jane Comalt. I chair the Climate Crisis Response Committee, and I'm a PPS parent. I've sat at this table several times as an advocate in the development of the climate crisis response policy, and I'm pleased to be back in this capacity in support of the policy and its implementation. This is
Hi, I'm Angela Long, a PPS parent as well.
And there's a few other members of our committee that are here tonight. Can you stand up? That's Isaac Barrow and Diane Riley.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
As you recall, the Climate Crisis Response, Climate Justice, and Sustainable Practices Policy included a provision to create a Climate Crisis Response Committee comprised of up to 9 members, with a majority of members who identify as people of color and 2 student members to monitor effective implementation, transparency, and track progress on the policy. Our group of 9 members were selected from a pool of over 70 applicants and approved by you, the PPS School Board, in August of 2022. And I'd just like to take a moment as a side note to thank our 2 student members, Danny Cage and Richard Dang. They're just wrapping up their term, and we, like you, have to say goodbye to them now. And we're recruiting for 2 new student members, so anyone watching who's interested, we encourage you to go to the Climate Justice website for that. The written report, which is included in today's agenda package, is organized by the duties of the committee, which are outlined in our committee charter. It includes the requirement to share written findings with the board at least annually. This represents our inaugural report. It's been unanimously recommended by our committee for submission to the board at today's meeting. I'll share some highlights from the report, again, organized by our charter duties, and it will include some findings and recommendations. So one of the committee's duties is to receive relevant reports and data from district staff on the current status and planned implementation of the policy. An early priority identified by the committee was the need for a dashboard that could be used to evaluate progress toward the goals and sub-goals outlined in the policy, including specific attention to the impact of the policy implementation on frontline communities. With input from the committee, district staff developed a project management dashboard. That's just a tiny snapshot of it. To track and report on progress of the policy. We applaud this thorough and very detailed tool. It obviously took a great deal of effort to develop and collect and input all the information within it. We believe it will be helpful for monitoring implementation of the policy, especially for district staff. Another major milestone was the completion of a greenhouse gas inventory by an outside consultant, which the committee reviewed and found it to be a comprehensive and very professional report. We note the 2019 baseline was inventoried at just over 46,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and PPS will need to work quickly and effectively to reduce that by half by 2030. The other major data-related item that was reviewed by the committee was by PPS consultant Echo Northwest. The consultant provided an overview of their scope of work to the committee. They're developing an evaluation plan for the policy. At that stage, we had some questions about their approach, especially in data analysis related to climate justice. I note from the staff report in today's agenda, it looks like this project has been completed, but our committee has not received an update. It wasn't ready in time for our last meeting in May.
Just a quick question. I'm sorry, I haven't had time to dive into the report yet. But so the dashboard there is telling us 46,000 metric tons of CO2, about half of which is natural gas, 41% electricity, and then fleet.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
The vast majority is buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Heating, cooling buildings. Yeah. So in the second part of our duties in the committee charter is around status and implementation. And so I just want to note some of the major policy implementation milestones that PPS that we're aware of that PPS achieved this fiscal year. So Climate Justice Advisor was hired in June of 2022. This project management dashboard was created. Greenhouse gas inventory was completed. This evaluation plan was commissioned. Staff put on a youth climate summit for hundreds of high school students. Design standards for new and existing buildings are being updated, and we heard about some solid waste reduction and expanding green schoolyards efforts being made. In terms of the committee itself, creating this group was obviously a notable milestone this past year. We met 6 times between September of 2022 and May of 2023. We appointed a committee chair, which is me. We recommended for this inaugural group to extend the 1-year term members. We have staggered terms with an additional 2 years, which you all approved in February to go ahead with that. The committee also formed 3 working groups this past year to delve deeper into certain areas. We had a dashboard working group that collaborated with staff on that project management dashboard, a community engagement working group, and lastly, a board working group. We've also discussed and planned for next year to have a 4th group dedicated to supporting PPS's efforts to resources policy, looking at things like budgeting. So for findings and recommendations, we have 3 main areas to share. The first is we recommend that PPS continues using and developing a project management dashboard and provide more information in specific areas. As noted, we believe that dashboard is a useful tool. PPS should continue to refine it over time. As it gets used, it can become even more useful for tracking and reporting on progress and managing the implementation of the policy. Given the level of detail and complexity of that tool, we see it mostly useful for district staff, to some extent our committee as well. And in addition to that project management dashboard, we recommend the creation of a community dashboard, or call it what you want, but a reporting mechanism that shares information about the policy and its implementation status that's in an easy to understand, relevant to folks in the community that are looking for things maybe happening at their school or their area of interest. We believe this should be developed with input from students, the committee, and the community, and whatever is developed should be easy to find and navigate on the PPS website. Overlaying both of these tools, we recommend the explicit incorporation of data and discussion about climate justice and impacts on frontline communities, just to follow the intent of the policy and just keep that front of mind. Other areas of interest to the committee specific to implementation of the policy that we'd like to include on the agenda for the upcoming fiscal year include purchasing, curriculum, a medium to long-term financial plan for implementation of the policy, and a building upgrade plan, given that buildings are such a huge part of the greenhouse gas footprint for PPS. The second area for recommendations is to augment organization leadership and development and accelerate the pace of implementation. The scope of this policy is very broad. It requires that implementation is owned by PPS staff throughout the organization. The Climate Justice Advisor, hired in June of last year, was a major milestone in implementing the policy, and they've been professional, knowledgeable, and competent in liaising with the committee. That's Kat. We really appreciate Kat. She's been wonderful to work with, also Hannah and Aaron. And yeah, we've had the pleasure of working with some great PPS staff this year, and we really thank them for all the effort that they've put in. And it's been the first year for all of us, so we're kind of trying to figure out how to continue this work. The Climate Justice Advisor obviously has a central role in coordinating and supporting the policy, and their scope of work is enormous. With additional resources, the policy could advance at a faster pace. We recommend that PPS share a staffing plan that identifies the process and procedures used to manage staff throughout the policy's life, to understand how PPS plans to meet its goals and sub-goals across the organization. More resources are likely required to accelerate implementation of the policy. We acknowledge the scarcity of funding for public schools. However, as part of PPS's commitment to the policy, we recommend that a funding plan be developed and shared. Oh, sorry, one other thing I wanted to say was that explicit support from PPS leadership, both the school board and senior staff, will continue to be critical to the policy's ongoing success and really permeating all the aspects of the organization. And our last recommendation is to enhance transparency around policy implementation progress. PPS has content on its website related to the policy, certainly, but it's dispersed and lacking and not readily available from a Google search. We recommend building out a centralized website to support transparency and accessibility for students, the committee, and a wider PPS community with input from those groups. We also suggest boosting transparency in the development of major projects related to implementing the policy and providing the committee and the community an opportunity to give input in their development, again, at major milestones. The evaluation plan completed by Echo Northwest is a good example of a project closely aligned with the duties of the committee that we would have welcomed more opportunity to collaborate on. Wrapping up, overall, we feel that in the first year of the policy's adoption, PPS made a genuine effort to move forward on its implementation. Some notable milestones were achieved, and some of the invisible but critical work of establishing and updating internal business processes was undertaken. We acknowledge that it takes time to build organization capacity and scale up the district's efforts to tackle the climate crisis, climate justice, and sustainability. And with that said, the pace, rate, and scale of implementation of this fiscal year was not sufficient to meet the policy's aggressive goals. However, we're hopeful that the groundwork of this past year will enable acceleration of progress as soon as possible. And this concludes my summary of the committee's first annual report, and we welcome any questions and comments from the board.
Great, thank you. Thanks for that. And I know next up, we're also going to hear from staff about first year implementation of the climate crisis response policy. So maybe I would just say, are there any questions right now for this committee? But then we can also come back, and I assume you'll still be here, and bring you back up at the end of that presentation as well.
I'd just like to make a comment, if it's okay.
Please do.
So I feel like the district and the board is really lucky in two ways this year. We have had two groups of community members, both with the Community Budget Review Committee and this committee, that has brought a tremendous amount of external expertise. I mean, I go to those meetings and it's like, wow, how lucky are we that we have on this particular committee people that not only are committed to PPS because they're parents and community members and somehow affiliated with us, but also have an incredible amount of expertise and have worked really collaboratively with staff and CAT to take this policy, which is a huge, huge, complex piece of work, and actually distill it down into something that I feel like in the first year summary is really a great milestone, that you've been able to distill a complex policy into sort of the major work and the progress that's been made, and then in a very elegant and simple way sort of describe what needs to happen, the acceleration and the continued work. So I just want to acknowledge it's been amazing watching all of you work as the board liaison, and I really appreciate the expertise that you brought to the table and the collaborative nature of working with staff on something that's really complex to implement, and doing it for the first time in year one.
I just want to say I really look forward to the continued involvement of the committee, because I think, so much of this first year has been planning and also the inventory of what are the impacts of our system currently, which has taken a long time, and I think there's still some areas where we're still trying to figure that out and gather information. But for the most part, we have that back. We see our emissions, and now I think this is where the work gets really interesting, when we, as a district, start to prioritize, okay, what kind of choices are we going to make to get the impacts that we know we need? Because it's not cut and dried. I mean, there are several different approaches that could work, or ways to focus, even when we have very clear goals in mind. So I just hope that there continues to be a strong dialogue with our citizen committee, our community committee, and with district staff about where are we going to place our bets. We're going to meet our goals, but which paths are we going to take? Because that still, for the most part, remains to be seen.
I'd just like to comment on sort of both your remarks, to say that I think I can speak for the whole committee that the committee exists to be an oversight group on implementation of the policy, but we're volunteering our time because we care about this and we really want to see PPS succeed, and I hope that you see us as a resource in helping to do that. And yeah, prioritization is going to be necessary and it's going to be hard.
Yeah, and I would like to add that one of the reasons why our recommendation for senior leadership from PPS to be involved going forward is because of the very thing that was just mentioned. And we're in the planning stage, but now we have to execute, and the timeline to do that in the next 8 years is going to go by really quickly. So we're going to need to start considering staff and leadership resources to make it happen if we're going to meet that goal.
I want to say also thank you for your work. Really appreciate this. I might have skipped over this in reading, but are we doing our greenhouse gas inventory in-house, or are we hiring out for that?
There was an outside consultant that did it.
Okay. So yeah, I'm really pleased to see the work. I was a fan and also somewhat of a critic, for doing this work, including the reduction of the dependence on natural gas, increase of electrification in our buildings and across all of our operations. I also want to just make a comment, as we're losing 2 student members, that it would be really great to create a pipeline of people that are speaking for this policy from frontline communities who are the most impacted by climate change. They're impacted first, and we've been intentional about diversifying this committee. And so if we could support the leadership and the voice of people that come from those communities, I know it's hard to get volunteers. I really know how difficult it is, but I would personally like to see an effort placed on that leadership pipeline, and particularly from students that are, I use this statistic all the time, but 50% of people under 50 are people of color, and 80% of people over 50 are white. And so if we think about the future and who we're speaking to and speaking for, I'd love to see that pipeline developed.
So just on that topic, so that mentioned earlier that we're having we had great representation this year as the students, and we're looking for new candidates, and we can absolutely be very focused in our recruitment of who serves on it. So I think that's also should be a charge to all of us. And maybe we can get some help from the district student council also. But I think that's our opportunity to also, we're losing 2 strong members, and we're have the opportunity to gain 2 more.
That's awesome. And one way you can attract people, I know the city of Portland actually pays, nobody wants to hear about paying anything, but pays volunteers stipends. Because we've heard for so many years, you can't find, people of color that have the time or energy to volunteer. But if you can incent people by paying for their meeting time, it doesn't have to be a lot, but that can help increase that participation.
Thank you. Yeah, really appreciate this work. So on the same vein, we are next going to receive an update on the first year implementation of the climate crisis response policy, and Superintendent Guerrero.
Thank you to the committee for your report. I think it does dovetail with the next part of the agenda here. As you all know, the board has really made a commitment to a pretty bold and ambitious policy. It talks about mobilizing our resources to reduce impact on climate change. It talks about our responsibility to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. It does center our frontline communities to have an active voice in climate resilience, developing the climate justice education component of this, connecting all of our stakeholders and community partners as leaders and seeking these solutions. So you're going to hear from Kat Davis next, our advisor for climate justice, and she's going to share sort of where we're at after a year now. There's actually been a lot of work, but we are reaching sort of important milestones and a critical next stage of this work, just like you heard our community leaders describe.
So as Kat is putting the presentation on the slide, I just want to maybe start with noting, from the committee, community committee, talking about the need for senior leadership to be taking a front row or a major role in the implementation. I just want to note that today and last week, senior leadership have gotten together to begin to think about the implementation. So we have all the things that you'll hear about today. The senior leadership is beginning to think about what that looks like and how we're going to reach our major milestones. So with that.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much to Jane for that and Angela for that wonderful report from the Climate Crisis Response Committee. So good evening, Board of Directors, Superintendent Guerrero, Student Representative McMahon. My name is Kat Davis, as you heard, and I'm the Climate Advisor for Climate Justice here at Portland Public Schools. So today I'll provide an overview to date on our progress to date on the Climate Crisis Response, Climate Justice, and Sustainable Practices Policy, along with our high-level implementation plan and strategic insight as to how we can move this work forward to uphold our commitment to our community. To review, this policy passed with the board last March of 2022, and our commitment includes a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other negative environmental impacts, to improve our school community's health and wellness, to build a culture of learning, responsibility, and sustainability centered on our values of racial equity and climate justice, and to educate and empower our students as leaders in a just transition to a sustainable city and a restorative society. In addition, our policy commits PPS to decarbonization, which includes some lofty goals of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030, to reach net zero by 2040, and to phase out all fossil fuel infrastructure by 2050. And in the light of so many urgent PPS priorities that we've heard from even just today, I will structure the way that we talk about this policy implementation in connection back to our strategic plan, our graduate portrait, and our board goals for student achievement, so that we can come together and understand how and why we have coordinated this approach and progress towards in our last year, and how we will move forward such that these activities are not in conflict with other PPS priorities, but rather can serve as a strategy to help make our work more efficient and to advance and uplift all of our goals district-wide. So to start to understand this policy as a strategy for other PPS goals, we must come to collectively understand the term climate justice. And so that we all have a shared language, I thought I'd review how our policy discusses this. By acknowledging that climate change disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable members of our community, and that implementation of this policy will prioritize serving people with disabilities, communities of color, and other vulnerable populations. Our students have a really unique position in this understanding of climate justice as the first generation to grow up with an unstable climate as their normal. They understand intimately how inequity exacerbates environmental injustices. So by honoring space for our diverse student body to share their own relationship with this issue, a climate justice education will advance the graduate portrait of vision of our of students as transformative racial equity leaders, as well as informed and influential global stewards. Another important factor to consider in this is that students across the nation report feeling extremely worried about climate change, and our own students echo this sentiment, with some saying that they cannot even imagine a positive future in the face of climate change. So we can rise to this challenge by investing in infrastructure that show that we are committed to our students' safety in this uncertain future ahead. We can provide professional development and resources for our teachers, our social workers, and our staff to better understand climate anxiety, eco-grief, and post-disaster trauma. And we can encourage innovative design and curiosity to fight against the overarching narrative that there is only a single future of doom, with the exploration of the many possibilities of futures of solutions. And it's with that commitment to joyful learning and inspiring learning spaces that we can inspire optimistic and future-oriented graduates as well. I also want to share this policy as a strategy for student achievement, because we know that, as we've heard today, our students and teachers perform best in high-quality learning environments with improved ventilation, lighting, building insulation, and technology. We know that rich and vibrant ecosystems activate curiosity, and that empowering student voice in action on local interdisciplinary projects instill an invaluable sense of pride and efficacy. So as we discuss our strategic direction forward, let us center how we can create inspiring learning spaces where our students can thrive despite a changing climate. So I will share just a quick overview of our approach to implementation and how this policy has being developed across the district. So we've developed this implementation plan inspired by the PPS Innovation Studio Design Framework to center that they put together for our Center for Black Student Excellence in mobilizing a district-wide transformative culture shift. So this policy implementation plan centers equity and community-based design in each of our 4 implementation phases, including a first phase to clarify relationships, history, current activity, and assess our needs. A second phase to ideate potential solutions, vision, and external consequences for each policy goal. Phase 3 is to prototype, co-create, and refine plans, policies, and programs. And Phase 4 is to implement those developed plans. So this framework is an iterative process of continuous design, analysis, and community-based feedback at all stages, and includes, and at this high level, this foundational year has been really characterized by this first phase of clarifying this work. We'll continue into this phase as we advance into the next year and move into our ideate phase as we continue to define policy priorities and co-create a vision for success with our community. So just to illustrate the expanse of this work across PPS and why this first phase of Clarify is so important, I put together this organizational chart that highlights the PPS departments and their corresponding pillars that I've gotten to work with over the last year. This list is not exhaustive, and we know that each of our 81 school sites are doing amazing work to make change, and that our goal is to align our systems and structures to really support the work that those school sites are doing as well, to embrace the culture there. Needless to say, this organization-wide alignment in action is a large lift, and if our goal is to create a new system centered on climate justice, then it is important to understand where we are at so that we can best move forward. So with all of this implementation plan context, I will share some tangible progress that we've accomplished over the last year. As we discuss this lift for foundational work, it's important to recognize that this policy did not initiate climate action at PPS, and that activities to reduce emissions, prioritize local food, and embrace student empowerment have been part of PPS culture for decades. So some of these policy goals are really clearly defined, like we talked with some metrics earlier, but other metrics for success and goals are a little bit more vague in how they're stated. So because of this, we have this opportunity to really look at where we have this existing work and where we need to better define these goals moving forward. So this foundational year has thus prioritized gathering a history of baseline data for policy activities, and the result is a current state of policy progress, as seen as our Climate Crisis Response Policy Annual Report and Policy Progress Dashboard that you all had in your board resources today. Given the need to define baseline metrics and indicators, PPS contracted with an evaluator, Echo Northwest, to mobilize staff from across the district to identify existing data sets and activities. And the deliverables of this work are in our Climate Crisis Response Policy Activities and Targets document, as well as our evaluation and implementation plan. These deliverables will help PPS communicate progress on policy goals with transparency and prioritize activities by impact and feasibility, as well as further develop evaluation tools. So just to spend a few moments as well, in addition to these foundational activities, some tangible action has been taken across all policy pillars as well to help build new systems and support our goals to advance existing strands of work. So as you heard, we completed our greenhouse gas inventory, which sets baseline and evaluation guidelines for measuring emissions reduction. We will complete our green schoolyards inventory this summer. In the spring, PPS also finished installing waste sensors and updated our technical design standards so that future construction complies with policy goals. Each of these activities establishes the conditions necessary for future success. This spring, PPS also welcomed our first 2 new electric school buses, which is very exciting. We extended our TriMet passes through the summer and saw an increase in our walk and roll events. PPS's local food programs also continue to expand, where our amazing partners use school gardens to teach students how to grow food and connect with outdoor learning and nutrition with the curriculum. Active transportation and connection to nature, culture, and community is essential for nurturing a sense of belonging and efficacy for our students. And finally, we've also added opportunities for engagement and empowerment with climate action. So as you heard, our Climate Crisis Response Committee launched last year and provides a pathway for meaningful community advocacy and engagement. Opportunities like professional development on teaching with climate justice lens and the launch of our Sustainability Champions Network support our teachers in leading climate change action in their schools. And in April, over 300 high school students and teachers participated in a PPS Spring Climate Summit, where they connected the roots of climate change as systemic injustice and learned about the power of culture for climate action, creating their own creativity campaigns and using art and creativity for their own campaigns. And then finally, to advance curriculum, this year the co-created climate justice curriculum for the high schools continued across PPS high schools, and we continue to map out where different standards across grade bands and subjects connect to climate justice in order to develop a developmentally appropriate and culturally responsive curriculum. So there are also undoubtedly challenges to achieving our PPS climate goals, notably large-scale infrastructure changes within the confines of a limited budget. But as we navigate these challenges, I want to share some opportunities for continuous improvement with the center of understanding that we must balance the urgency of this climate crisis with the integrity of the process in which we are responding to it. With a deliberate approach to decarbonization, we can advance equity, regeneration, and resiliency. And I invite us to consider the following areas for continuous improvement to meet this urgency with integrity, including understanding how we might mobilize our teams and resources within PPS to integrate policy goals into newer and existing strands of work, the need to create consistent, transparent, and inclusive community discourse around the complex decisions of this policy implementation, and the need to coordinate a centralized system for collecting data and communicating stories about climate action. As you heard from our Climate Crisis Response Committee, they've echoed some of these opportunities for improvement as well, with an assessment that there has been genuine effort that's been made, but there's a great deal of work ahead to meet our 2030 and 2040 goals. They call for an acceleration of progress and integration of policy goals into PPS workflows, as well as an increased resources devoted to policy implementation and increased transparency and communication on progress. Central to this call is also to intentionally center environmental justice in our data sources and outcomes. So to respond to all these opportunities for continuous improvement both I and the community have identified, I wanted to share a work plan for this policy over the next year. First off, we are examining an organizational shift in staffing at climate justice at PPS and expanding how to integrate these goals into our departmental workflows. To navigate a complex set of challenges in reducing emissions, PPS will also pursue the development of a decarbonization roadmap, which will result in a prioritization tool to meet our emissions, equity, and resiliency goals. And on that note, another concern is resources, right? We're facing a really challenging state budget. So we're fortunate that thanks to partnership and advocacy, we're anticipating receiving around $20 million from the Portland Clean Energy Fund, assuming that is approved by City Council, to use over the next 5 years in a way that will advance our policy goals. And that public funding like these are a huge help in getting to the right direction as we mobilize a budget for our own schools. In addition, we're working to advance communication and transparency through coordinating an accessible and engaging community-facing policy interface. And finally, our final deliverable from Echo Northwest specifically calls out connections to environmental justice and similarly advises at disaggregating population data where possible so we can ensure that our approach is in fact equitable and accessible by all of our communities. So we're excited to be able to use that tool to further our development over the next year. So in addition to this work plan of really tangible action is a commitment to strategic direction for a district-wide approach to manifesting our goals. And this includes a commitment to inclusive, collaborative, and data-driven decision-making, which engages departments across PPS to contribute to centralized policy data tracking and reporting systems, and to develop robust, sustainable, and responsive community engagement programs. And we can also practice a strategic advocacy and allocation of resources. So making sure that we're specifically funding programs for capital projects that directly fulfill policy directives, such that we're not competing with allocations for existing essential services or infrastructure. We don't want to be in a position where we're pitting existing necessary services against policy directives. And while there's a variety of public funding opportunities coming online in the next few years, we must prepare to fund project management and partnership staff to successfully fulfill these funding opportunities, as well as the maintenance staff that will be required, that will be needed to better maintain the infrastructure and technology that we'll be adding. And finally, with coordinated and effective leadership, we are initiating a climate crisis staff advisory group to support cross-organizational policy decisions and how we integrate these goals into department workflows. We also need to establish a practice of strategic foresight and sustainable teaming structures to coordinate core initiatives that call for district-wide culture shift. And finally, we must embrace and communicate policy activities as strategies to fulfill priorities as how they contribute to the outcomes of the graduate portrait. And just to reiterate, to advance all of our policy goals at a sufficient pace, we must develop a multi-pronged approach to procuring and allocating resources in a really creative way. So as I start to wrap up, I want to take a moment to highlight that this policy has warranted some national attention, including the National School Board Association Magna Award, features on national media outlets, and invitations to present across the country. School districts are looking at us for how we move forward on this kind of work. So as we continue to advance policy implementation, I invite you all to let this moment sink in. We are setting the stage for how a school district can respond to the climate crisis. And as my colleagues and I continue to wrap our heads around the best way to move this work forward, we have to continuously remind ourselves that we are in wheel inventing territory here. We are literally inventing this wheel. And this approach is one of the first of its kind, so there will continue to be lessons learned, and I really want to appreciate the leadership of you all as we continue this work forward into uncharted territory. So just to wrap up, the 2022-2023 policy implementation scope has brought to light a wealth of activities that show a history of commitment to climate action. And despite work to be done, this year has established the necessary foundation and celebrates really tangible policy progress. While there are challenges ahead, leadership support of a cohesive and coordinated approach to this work will ensure that PPS sets the stage for how to develop a transformative, rigorous, and joyous approach to climate justice education as we move forward together. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about that.
Great. Thank you for the presentation and obviously all the work. I'll open it up for board conversation, questions, comments, praise, feedback.
Very impressive.
Amazing.
Director Brim-Edwards.
A couple questions, because I missed one of the meetings where I think this got covered. But I'm curious, thank you for the presentation. And again, I think the scope, this was a great foundation laying year. And I'm curious about the evaluation tool that was added. Did the committee have an opportunity to provide the oversight that committee that presented early? Did they have the opportunity to be involved in the scoping or the direction of the evaluation? I assume in some ways I view their oversight role as part of, is it working, what's happening? And then the evaluation tool would be very helpful. So I'm curious what their involvement was in the scoping and setting the direction, and then ultimately also receiving the results of the evaluation.
Absolutely. So our evaluators were able to come to one of our policy committee meetings, our climate crisis response policy meetings, and were able to share an initial direction of how we were approaching implementation and procuring data and defining indicators to get some feedback from the committee about what kinds of data and indicators that they would like to see and how we were able to measure progress on this policy. So the feedback that was provided to them was included in the evaluation tool, and the results of that evaluation framework we received that on June 2nd, so I was able to share that with the committee members, but they haven't had a chance to meet since then. So that'll be something that we can start next year with, is to look at the deliverables that came from that evaluation process. And like I said, those tools are not anything that's like set in stone. It's really to help provide us with a map and really give us a good starting point to start deepening our conversation around how to best define our metrics and our data so that we are really making progress on the true intent and the spirit of what the policy is getting at.
So just to clarify, so I understand that what the what is it a one-time evaluation, or is it creating a structure in which you get a continuous refresh of data?
That's a great clarification question. So the scope of work was to help us define our baseline data and indicators, as well as set targets for our 2028 and 2040 goals, so that we can start to develop the evaluation tools within PPS to track the data needed to make and communicate progress on our goals. Did that help answer your question?
It does. And then just the follow-up question. As noted by the committee, that under the current, and I'm going to put a big asterisk on this, under the current pace, we're not set to meet our decarbonization goals, and that acceleration is needed. Are we in the flat part of the hockey stick phase, Or is there, from a staff standpoint, we need to make adjustments, or is it we really need to let things continue to play out because we see there'll be this upward trend of meet our goals?
That's a great question, and something that we're all really grappling with is how do we meet these goals? So the first thing that we really need is a comprehensive plan of how to strategically invest our limited resources to best achieve our decarbonization goals, but also our resiliency goals. Those are some trade-offs that we're looking at how to make, but making sure that as we approach decarbonization, we're doing so acknowledging that our aging infrastructure desperately needs some updating as well. So that's a really tenuous and complex plan. And so for that plan, we're putting together a decarbonization roadmap to be able to have that really clear path forward that really takes into account our need for decarbonization as well as equity and resiliency and efficiency. And in addition to this plan, once we know, okay, this is our prioritization tool, this is how we can best invest our monies across the district in a way that's going to get us to these goals, we also need a huge lift of resources. We're going to need to really strategically think about how we're being able to use perhaps our bond money for this, how we can advocate for funding at the state and local and federal level, anywhere we can be advocating for funding to be investing in these this lift, because this will be a large infrastructure investment that we need to make in order to reach those goals. And in terms of staffing and internal resources, that's the work that we were just describing around the strategic direction of how can we really make sure that all of our departments are fully aware of and on board for how to do this work together in a way that's the most efficient and able to achieve, I like to say, feed multiple birds with one worm. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And I would say we would need to rely heavily on our school board. Kat is a central office administrator, right? And much of this work that needs to happen to get us to this to our goals will require a lot of central office staff and administration. And so as we think about what those trade-offs and those conversations, right, we want to meet our community's goals. And so that requires a broader conversation in community about how do we meet that, understanding that we have very limited resources.
That's a really great point. The PSEF funding, $20 million could come to PPS. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, it's just over $16 million for infrastructure and $3 million for student projects, which is really exciting, over 5 years.
Over 5 years,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Yeah.
Is that money pretty certain? I know you've been engaged, or someone's been engaged with them, but it's not approved yet, right? But they're moving in that direction. Am I right about that?
Yeah, it's in the climate investment plan that PSEF is presenting to the city council for approval. So
Just a matter of background, we applied. So originally, when PSEF was established, it was very much situated as a grant opportunity for folks. We, as a district, applied, got rejected because we were competing against a lot of small, really important nonprofit work. And so our conversations over the last year has been about how to get to your goals as a PSEF organization. You need to work in partnership, in tandem with us, for example, as one of the largest property owners in the city, to meet these goals. And so since then, we've been having a lot of conversations about what that direct investment looks like, right? So beyond the dollars, we will continue to work in partnership to reach our collective goals as a community.
That's great. Thank you. Any other questions, comments?
I just wanted to thank you again for the body of work. It's a lot of work in a year. I'm really excited to learn more about the decarbonization roadmap, because I think that's, it's kind of, people ask, when you're implementing energy efficiency in your home, if you just get solar, but you don't have double-paned windows or insulation, or, there's an order of operations that makes sense, so that's exciting. I had some questions also about key performance indicators, and looking forward to learning more about that. I also wanted to say, you used the term climate grief, and I just got an invitation, I sent it to you, for an associate of mine that's holding a climate grief workshop at the Sitka Center in July. So I sent you that information. That came from the Environmental Professionals of Color, which is a national group, but started here in Portland. Very robust, huge listserv of Black and brown professionals in the climate space. And finally, just again, wanted to say, would love to hear some of the ways that we're thinking. Would love to see it guided by Pacific Islanders, Native American people in particular, and Black people, because the way that we think about this matters, and I find the approach to be quite different and effective. So, if we could include those voices, it would be wonderful.
Absolutely.
Great.
One more thing I wanted to say about financing, and that's the University of British Columbia had a financing tool where it was a 20-year plan to reduce energy on campus, and they worked with the utility company and I believe McKinstry to, so the financing came out of energy savings, so the university had no upfront cost and paid off the investment over time based on a percentage of energy savings. So it's a really great model, and I've mentioned it. I think this was in 2010, but you might want to look into that. University of British Columbia.
Thanks. Dope.
Yeah.
Student representative.
Well, thank you very much for the work, and to all the members of the committee as well. I just wondered, are we planning on taking up the opportunities to present the work more nationally? I know that you said we've got invitations, because obviously it's a very unique program, and I'm sure a lot of other school districts out there are probably pretty desperate to know how we've been combating the problem, since obviously it's something across the nation we should be dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been looking for more conferences to be able to go to. I think we went to 4 over the last year where we were able to present this work in a variety of different spaces. Something I'd really love to see is more student opportunities to present and taking students to show, some of the work that's happening at our schools, and the result of this is advocacy. There's actually been some great articles about student leadership in this work where PPS has been featured, so I would love to see that really mobilized as well. So yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Thanks for the work. Thanks for the presentation
Thank you.
update tonight. Appreciate it. All right, moving on. Maybe we can call it the capstone for tonight's agenda. Budget adoption. So tonight we are set to vote on adoption of the superintendent's proposed budget for the 2023-24 school year. Before we get into that conversation, I just want to recap a little bit how we got here, the context. And the opportunities that the board and the public have had to hear and weigh in on the formation of the 2023-24 budget. So we had our first budget work session way back in November, followed by another one in February, and then we had 2 more work sessions in March, all of which were discussing the overall budget forecast and framework. The superintendent then, based on that feedback from the board, presented his proposed budget to the board in April. And then at the last meeting, the board, acting as the budget committee, unanimously approved the superintendent's proposed budget for the 2023-24 school year. Tonight, we are voting to adopt it. So I'm going to get this on the table, and then we'll open it up for board discussion and public comment. So do I have a motion and second to adopt Resolution 6718 to impose taxes, including to pay for the budgeted bonded debt levy amount of $165 million and adoption of the 2023-24 budget for school district number 1J, Multnomah County, Oregon?
So moved.
Second.
Director Constand moves, Director Lowry seconds, and now we will open it up for board discussion. And actually, I'll just ask Kara, do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do.
Okay, so let's do a few minutes of board discussion. We'll go to public comment and then wrap up. So, Chief Delgadillo, I don't know if you have anything to share with us tonight.
I don't, but I'm here available, and if there's questions.
Can I just ask a kickoff question? Yeah. Can you walk us through the bonded debt levy amount? I know in your memo you sort of said it went from 170 to 165 million, I believe.
Yeah, correct. So after doing our initial number of 170 million was just based on our preliminary analysis. And after some further conversations, we noted that we could be lower at $165 million, which is a benefit to Portland taxpayers. So ultimately, that means there'll be less dollars that we'd be taxing Portland, our Portland community, but still meet our debt. So this is an issue. This is not issuing bond. This is just essentially the taxes we collect to pay the bond back.
Great. So we only needed 165 million, so we're only going to charge the taxpayers 165 million.
Only, yeah.
I know. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And this is on the building side, not on the general side.
Correct. Okay, so with that, let's open it up for any board discussion.
So I know we had a conversation last time about school psychs, and that you, Byrne, had brought forth an amendment to that. We talked about it. I did ask the question of what is the caseload for school psychs, and
The recommended is 500, and we're at 750, not caseload, but the school psychs per population, and we're at 750. And I don't know if there's at this moment a place to pull that out, but I think that really needs to be highlighted. We talked about our counselor number and other numbers, but I really think going forward, that school psych number, we need to get that down to the 500 in subsequent years. And I think that really should be a priority of this board. And I know it's a priority that Student Representative McMahon highlighted for us last time. And I would encourage you all, when you start next November on this budget cycle, to really look at those kinds of things. I wish I'd asked that question earlier about what are the recommended number of people like school psychs per student population. And we're at, 750 instead of 500 is a big, big difference in those population numbers. And the reason I'm not bringing forth an amendment at this time to change that is because when we look at things like those campus safety officers, it's again this house of cards of where do you pull to put something else. And I don't feel like I have the ability at this moment to shift those numbers in a way that wouldn't cause unintended harm in other places.
Just following on that, assuming we get additional resources from the state, which looks likely, the last meeting we also talked about that money would come back and there would be a proposal from the superintendent that potentially that's a place where that could be one area. Obviously, there's lots of potentially other priorities, but that could be a place because this is the budget that's built on the state allocation of 9.9. So in all likelihood, we'll have more resources. So that's potentially an area. And Bryony, we know you will be here in spirit still with us, even if you're off at school.
I'll come back and give public testimony.
Yeah. So just noting that that's potentially Director Haley, and I think it's a good point to just center ourselves on what's the recommended as the beginning and always use that as the sort of at a minimum the aspirational benchmark.
And I guess I'll add, I'm very hopeful the education budget will be higher. There is also the potential right now that it will be lower as a result of failure for the state to pass a budget. So yes, I love the optimism. I hope in the end that we can end up at a 10.2 or 10.3 or maybe even, the Republican number of 10.4. But I do worry because if the budget doesn't pass, we are still waiting for guidance from ODE, which I believe we have not yet received. But there is the potential of actually the allocation in the short term dropping to 9.6, which would mean some short-term pain.
9.3.
9.3 billion.
My apologies.
I'm glad that the board understands the context here because we do have a budget in front of you at the 9.9 billion state school fund level, which unless there's action by the legislature defaults to 9.3. So for us, it's like, well, hold on to our nickels until we learn otherwise. We're going to continue to be optimistic. We're not being spectators. We continue to be very proactive in our advocacy. We are hoping for the higher 10.2. That could mean the difference of 10 to 12 million a year. We have no shortage of very important areas like caseloads for school psychs, for example, where we'd like to make another increment of an investment. And we have to come back to the board and decide on what balance of added fund balance or other priorities we'll need to stretch those dollars as much as we can.
So basically, the legislature needs to get their act together.
What do you really think, though?
Okay, why don't we, Kara, why don't we shift to public testimony and then we'll come back for board discussion.
Be Young You.
Got some documents for y'all. So I have this first stack to pass out. And then this is just a stack of unfilled substitute positions that I brought. So you have to see it now.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Whoa. It's hot, huh? Byung Yu, Beyoung. Good evening. On this table and yours is over 1,000 pages of substitute jobs that nobody wanted to work this school year and last. A grand total of 37,409 unfilled substitutes for PAT and PFSP. That's almost 40,000 times an ELD student did not receive services. A child did not have their para for a feeding tube. Who does this labor for these jobs when there is no substitute? If we didn't pay for substitutes, then where do these millions of dollars go? I look around at special education jobs that sit idle for months, like IEPs in a moderately dingy closet. If we never hired for these positions, where does that money go? When you say there's no money, I look around this air-conditioned room and think about these six-figure salaries in district headquarters. I think about the asbestos in our walls and the sign above my faucet that says water is unsafe to drink. Staff working conditions are student learning conditions. Each budget tells a story. When we invest $2 million in a communications team and our room are 93 degrees, when our third grade DLI classroom has 31 kids registered for next year, when we spend millions on wit and wisdom so our kids still getting that whitewashed colonized history I got in the 90s, financial mismanagement. The shirt I'm wearing says, "Not today, colonizer." Not just a statement to those that look upon it, but a reminder to myself as a biracial Korean, for I have the ancestry of the colonized and the colonizer. And when both bloodlines exist in my body, I cannot teach my students the lies that assimilated my childhood. We could be teaching the local history of Vanport, Chinese exclusionary laws, gentrification of Albina, and a Portland Expo Center that used to headquarter as a Japanese incarceration camp. But I don't see that in our budget. I don't see the part that talks about the superintendent's central office hiring freeze and last week's job postings to hire 3 higher paid admin on the backs of 50 cut TOSAs. If each budget tells a history and omits another, who hires the people that work on the PPS budget? The district? We should look at the PPS framework of racial equity and social justice and hire someone to align everything we spend money on in the budget. When we're talking millions and billions, audit the district, audit the auditor, audit the people that audit the auditor. A practice of auditing audits makes sense when a budget tells one story and omits another. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
Great, thank you. Okay, back to board conversation, questions. We ready to vote?
I had a question about go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask about the, earlier, some of the testimony talked about education assistant layoffs. Are we having layoffs in any of our positions?
Chief of HR, Sharon Rees, I don't know that she will have the answer at her fingertips.
Well, it was just a surprising statement because I know that we have had a shortage of education assistants and paras, it seems like, for the last several years. So it was a surprising statement that we'd have layoffs. So I'm just wanted to follow up on that.
Well, I don't want to give you inaccurate information, so let me go find out. But there usually is a lot more churn in PFSP positions, and then a lot of callbacks.
Just got a question. So we're having a budget discussion. You know, we're going to have budget questions. We don't have any budget information.
About layoffs?
Right.
I don't have it at my fingertips. I don't have the number of positions that got laid off or what the callbacks are, because that's what happens is there's a reduction in the number of positions. People get unassigned, and then people get called back into positions as they open back up. So layoffs is not a budget decision. Assignments is what is a budget decision.
I guess the reason I just asked the question is that the last several years, that it seems like that's been a place where we haven't had enough EAs. I know in some of the Southeast Guiding Coalition schools, they had EA positions that never got, like last fall, that never got filled. So I'm just curious about the mismatch. Did they all get filled, the ones last year, and then we budgeted for less, and that's why we're having layoffs? Because if they weren't
I'm having somebody look at EAs right now. We aren't laying off any paras. Was that brought up? But, yeah.
So I think the question is, like, do we have fewer FTE? Like, where do we have fewer FTE for the 23-24 than we did in 22-23?
Yeah, that's a better way to ask. I mean,
because I think unassignment and layoffs are different.
Right.
Well, I guess we've learned that sometimes just because you cut positions doesn't mean you have layoffs.
Correct.
But
Right.
however, I'm wondering if we have layoffs, does that mean we have fewer EA positions?
It's like, what's the net difference?
Right.
Right, and is that
between 21,
because there's
22,
fewer, that means, and we may have churn, but are there actually fewer EA positions?
That is my understanding. I don't have that number off the top of my head.
In
Yes.
terms of the overall staffing framework.
Yeah.
So there are less.
And last year, were all the positions, like, do we get back to a place of, like, everything was full? Like I say, there was several EA positions in the Southeast Guiding Schools that didn't get filled until, like, December.
They were still empty. They were still empty.
I think the challenge is that there's also turnover in EA positions as well. So positions come open new all of the time and then get hired for.
Yeah, I mean, these ones just never got filled.
So you're asking us if there was, are there any EA positions that were vacant through the
I guess
entire year?
my framework had always been that the last 2 years is that we don't have enough people to fill these positions. We've actually had either the foundations are buying, EA positions, or the district actually had EA positions that were open, but there weren't enough individuals to fill them. And so it would just surprise me to hear a statement that we're having 40 layoffs. So I'm just curious what.
And I will look back. I will look into that and get back to you about what that looks like.
I just want to make a general comment about the board's, what I optimistically believe will be the board's opportunity to add back to this approved budget once we have a more definitive number from the state legislature on the state school fund. I think we'll have an opportunity to do some things that have been removed for this budget or that haven't been anticipated. This would be my last opportunity to weigh in on that because I won't be part of those conversations. But I would encourage the board to seriously look at what we have set aside for our settlement of our labor contracts and really review the numbers around what it would take to bring our lowest wage employees in all positions in each bargaining unit up to some definition of a living wage job. It's so hard for me to sit here and hear this commentary from SEIU and PFSP because it's just struggle. It's just a struggle from our hardworking and highly valued employees. But two, it's an indicator of how intensely volatile this labor market is and has been. Because in both of our last settlements with SEIU and PFSP, we made great strides. And both sides left happy. I mean, we really made some significant differences for our custodians and for our nutrition services workers in particular. And now where we sit, looking at inflation and looking at just the rest of the job market that we're surrounded by, it's not enough. And that's just within 2 short years or something. So to me, I might say this is our highest priority because, you know, I do feel strongly that our employees' working conditions are our students' learning conditions. And particularly in such a job market where people are moving around so much, I mean, there should be a way that we reward our employees who stay in these roles because this is what they want to do and this is who they want to serve. And they are part of our PPS family. And we don't want them to feel encouraged to shop for another job because it means $1 or $2 more an hour doing something different. We want to reward them for staying. Each year they stay and each time they make a choice to serve our kids and our students. So I think that there will be some opportunity for the board to have this conversation, and I think it should be grounded in the data to really look at who are all these positions, where are they, what bargaining units, and what would it take to make some significant shifts there. Because to me, that's a missing piece of frankly, our whole strategic vision. I mean, it's to my mind and my heart, we're out of alignment with our values in terms of the wages right now for our lowest wage employees.
Can I add that, you know, it's when you want a sustainable organization, it's more than just saving kilowatts, but it's also that social sustainability side that does have to do with wage and worker treatment, family leave policies, and the ways workers are supported. So I think that's good. I had a question about the delta between the 9.9 and the 10.2, and have heard from community partners that are very worried about the summer programming that they did not get funded for. So I'm wondering if it might be too late by the time we hear back, but wondering if some of that money could be invested next year for summer programming in some of some of the partners that work with our most vulnerable kids, particularly around like gun violence reduction.
Sure. A quick response on that one. Staff shared information about half of our over 50 community-based organization, culture-specific partners applied for. About half received awards to be able to provide enrichment opportunities combined with our academic programs. You know, we have a goal of hopefully serving up to 5,000 students. That would be remarkable if we came anywhere close to that. But this is another one of those areas where, you know, we reserved resources to be able to provide extended learning opportunities and enrichment for our students this summer in the absence of the legislature passing summer school extended learning money. So had we had those funds, those resources could have gone to some of these other priorities. You just heard Kat present our climate justice. She's a one-woman show. So, you know, there's work to be done there as well, you know, and I could go down the list. So, you know, we want to be the employer of choice. We share the same aspiration to get all of our employees at a minimum at a living wage over time. Like 83% of our operating costs are in our employees. So, you know, we can make choices and move the dials in different directions, and that's a trade-off also. So, you know, advocating for continued revenue that keeps up with our, you know, inflation and the cost of doing business, it takes even more to get ahead and do some of those things. So, you know, those are the realities.
Director Brevoters?
So I just had just a couple comments. Well, one final question that something you said, Superintendent Guerrero, that maybe I think that I should ask the question. There's no chance, if say there's no action by the legislature and we're in this 9-3, that it's going to disrupt our summer school programming, is it?
No, we're proceeding full speed ahead, even though this budget is at 9.9. If the state was to revert to the continuing action and brings down the funding we would receive or payments that we would have deposited at the 9.3 continuing level, we would be able to sort of resource ourselves for a short amount of time and kind of sustain till a time period of a special session or other action. But We can do that due to our economy of scale better than most school districts. Other school districts can go about 2 to 4 weeks before they go belly up. Conservatively, I think we can go about 8 to 12 weeks. And then
talking about our reserves.
and we're also talking about our reserves, which is why they exist when cash flow gets disrupted, and we don't want to be in that situation because then you have to cease operations, and we hope we never get to that kind of a dramatic point.
Great, I'm really glad to hear that, because I know for those students who needed that acceleration coming out of the pandemic, how important that was. So just one thing I want to compliment the team on incorporating in the final budget the middle school components that I think are going to be really important supports for both our students, their families, and staff. So appreciate that that got into the final piece. And then I just have I guess just two thoughts for the looking ahead. I just like the climate committee today. I feel like this community budget review committee did just an amazing job, and we weren't able to fully utilize that. So thinking about as we head into this next year, how to utilize it, because really it is designed to help us work on this budget or that year's budget. So how do we better utilize what I thought was just like an excellent body of work that was done that didn't quite get, I think, fully utilized by the board in our thinking about it and getting our questions answered and getting the community's questions answered. And so that would just be a look ahead piece of how we incorporate into the process. And then the other piece is I'm really appreciative that there were funds put in from the one-time monies for the individual school grants that allowed schools that in the past, because they didn't have foundations and weren't able to, didn't have some discretionary dollars for staff, that they had that, because just from talking to various school communities this year, I found that breathing room those resources gave them provided some flexibilities for schools to do things that previously, because of just the basics they needed to do if they didn't have any extra, that it really made a difference. And so this is just thinking ahead about, I know that's one-time dollars, about making sure we evaluate it afterwards and look at if it shows that that's worthwhile. Like I say, it feels like it gave schools more breathing rooms and principals more discretion to really target things specifically in their schools if they didn't have some private funds, or the flexibility because they had title money that they had to spend in a particular way, that we think through next year, if the evaluation shows that it's an effective way to support our schools, that we figure out how to build that into the base budget if we're able. But I thank you, and I know that it made a big difference to a lot of school communities.
So I'm gonna just make some comments and then I'm done. So I'm gonna vote no on the budget piece, and this is the reason why. You know, when the state tells us, our QEM is this number, and yet they fund us at a lower number, for me, it sends a message that even though we know you need this to educate our kids, we're going to give you less and then expect for us to educate our kids. That's a problem with me. It's a contradiction that I don't understand. There's no way you can make that right, that you say, okay, we need this. You need this to do the work that we think you need, but yet we're not going to fund it. And then it causes all this other stuff. So that's one thing. The other thing is on our side, and I've been asking November, February, March, April, how are we assessing the programs that we have to know how we need to budget for this year? I've asked multiple times. I've got an email from Dr. Adams, one that talk and explain it. We haven't set that up yet, but I guess it's hard for me to, on this side, I'm sure that the staff has done this work. I would hope so that they did. But for me, sitting on site to approve a budget, it's hard for me to approve a budget without information of what worked in the last budget or the budget before that. And I think that's something that we need to at least work on, is that assessment piece. My company, we assess every year. We're nowhere as big as $2.some million, but that information would be very helpful when making budget decisions. We're doing a lot of good with the money that we have. There is, the opportunity about pay gaps and inequalities in pay is going to always happen when you have outside sources. For instance, housing goes up tremendously more than the cost of wages goes up. We will never catch up as an organization, and this is not just something that is with PPS. This is something that is the private and public sector deals with. We deal with rising costs of housing, rising costs of food, with the money that comes in that's not keeping pace for us either. And as a business owner, I'm having these same conversations. When food prices goes up 18% and housing goes up in double digits, well, as an organization or as a company, it's hard for me to say, okay, well, here's 20, 28, 29% increases. And it just doesn't keep up when the money that we're receiving is not going up 28, 29, 30% as well. And I do feel that, that balance that we have, we're definitely going to have to continue to look at and monitor and assess. But I want to make sure that as an organization that we are making sure we are being transparent, honest, so we can be trustworthy as an organization. For me, a lot of it just seems like a lot of BS that comes out of different conversations, and I've been watching the budget meeting since the first one, and it's on both sides. So let's be clear, it's on both sides. I understand the posturing that goes on. I wish we can hopefully get past that posturing piece to get to a point, because at the end of the day, this only hurts our kids.
Are you talking about the bargaining
meetings?
I heard you say budgeting.
Oh, sorry, bargaining. Because it only hurts our kids. Nobody in here is affected by the decisions that we make. It's only our kids that we serve. And so I just want to make sure we keep that in mind when we are doing these budgets and bargaining and all that stuff, that at the end of the day, our kids is the one that suffers for our inadequacies of being able to do what we need to do for them. That's it.
I think that goes to some of what AJ Craybill said to us as a board when we did our retreat this thing. The only way that outcomes for students will change is when adult behaviors change. And that's true for all of us, all of the adults in the system, that we are stuck where we are, and it will only change when adult behaviors change. The church is going through similar things, Gary, with economics. We just passed an increase for all pastors, and some of our smaller churches are saying we will have to close because we won't be able to afford to pay our pastors. So it becomes this question of, do we increase the pastor salary, knowing that some small churches might have to close? So how do we hold both of those things in tension, that costs have gone up, we want to pay people well, and there are economic realities on the other side too. It's affecting all sectors.
Yeah. So, I think, as Amy was saying, I think right now we're in a really difficult position because we just don't really know what we're getting into. Is basically what I'm hearing, is that, like, we could have less, we could have more, we could have a little less, we could have a little more, we could have a lot more. And so I think that it's really difficult when we're supposed to be making this budget decision when we don't really have that final total. So I just want to kind of follow the vein of Amy, and if we do have those additional funds, I think, one, we talked about school psychs, and I stand by what I originally said. I actually got the opportunity to talk to a lot of CSAs and talk to their work, about their work, and definitely I reflected on that decision after we left this boardroom and wanted to see, okay, what should we be valuing here? I think we talked about it last time. They provide very different services, but I think that it is really important that we prioritize our students' mental health, especially during this time, which CSAs definitely affect, but their role is so different than school psychs. And I think it's really important to support the work that school psychs are doing just because it's so necessary, and we heard that from students and we heard that obviously from our staff. The other thing I'll say, and Gary, I know you were just talking about it, but all of our actions affect our students, but all of our staff affect our students. And if we don't have happy staff who have livable wages, who have livable conditions in their classrooms, then we cannot expect them to educate our students. And so I definitely would say, obviously our actions affect our students, but they definitely don't only affect our students. Because as much as we are supposed to, we are the stewards of the children in this city, and we are the stewards of their education, but the people that administer that education are our teachers, and the people that maintain the environments are obviously members of our unions. And so I definitely agree with what Amy said. As we move forward, if we get more money, what can we possibly be doing to make working at PPS more livable for our staff? Because if we do that, then our students obviously benefit.
Thanks.
One more thing. Sorry.
Did you say one more thing?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Really
Go for
quick,
it.
really quick.
Go for it.
The other thing is, I think in the budget process, it definitely feels like we wait, and then bam, it's out, and then we vote on it. And I think that obviously we don't have a lot of control over the budget process, but I think maybe having some preliminary budget meetings at the beginning of the year so that our community can be more involved in the visioning process, so that we can take that insight at the beginning of the year, and then as we're developing the budget, we can take that vision and use those priorities that our community gives us when we're creating it, because it sort of feels like right now we do it a little bit backwards, where like obviously we get this document and it's very hard to like read the entire document and then go through the changes and then do community outreach and then try to prioritize. And so I think if we can try to ingrain more community involvement earlier on would be great.
Yeah, I guess I just
and I think
wanna-
students specifically. Because
and
student
I think-
specifically,
and let's-
sorry.
Yeah, I would love more specifics on it, because I do want to point out we talked in November and January and February, twice in March, but we did, but those were they were public meetings, and we talked about priorities, and so I think let's talk about how to engage students. I having done public budgets for 20 years, it's really hard to get people to pay that much attention early. And so I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure this is a deficit in the process, right? Because people, until you get down to the approved and adopted budget, it doesn't matter how many times you put it out there and you meet and you take public testimony and you notify people. They're kind of like, yeah, but you're not going to vote on it for another 5 or 6 months. So yes, I love that input. How do we encourage people to give it to us when we're meeting in November, December, and January?
I also do want to say that I think this budget does reflect a lot of what we heard public testimony last year. Like, I think there's more emphasis on student-facing people. There are clear investments in mental health. There's clear investments in safety. So I do think this budget is not perfect, and it doesn't do everything we want it to do, and we know it falls short. We know it does. And I think that given the constraints and the reality of this complex system that we manage, that this budget is more responsive to what people have asked us to do publicly. And that's one of the hard things is sometimes when we hear public comment, we can't necessarily adjust this year, but it's, okay, these are the values of our community that they're saying again and again. How do we continue to invest in these things? And, we heard tonight, like, we need more to invest in climate crisis. We need to pay PFSP more. We need more money for maintenance. We need, to invest in the Harrison Park Community Garden. There's lots and lots of economic needs. So I think it's that every year I've been on PPS, I feel like the budget is more responsive to what the community has told us. But I do think you're right. How do we get students more involved in this process?
Yeah, and I should have specified students. I think that we do obviously get public testimony in those early meetings, and I think it's a great conversation we can have. But I think for a lot of students, obviously, it's obviously very much affects them, but I think it needs to be more proactive on our side if we're really going to say, we really want student input. It's not really enough if you want middle schoolers and high schoolers to engage and give you priorities when you set up a meeting 40 or 30 minutes from their house, at 6 o'clock when maybe they're not driving or maybe their parents can't get them here, and we're saying, hey, you had your opportunity. And I think that it's fair, and we totally can do more. And I mean, maybe that's even on me, right? I didn't go out to all the schools and like ask them specifically, hey, like, what are your 3 priorities? But I think that more proactive work on our part could be useful on the student aspect, for the student side.
I think I just want to say generally, sorry, Michelle will come to, but I think the budget only falls short because of the lack of funding.
Right.
And I guess I just want to be really clear. I mean, I'm going to vote for this budget. I think it does a really excellent job of taking the limited resources we have and investing them in programs that work. I mean, I'm going to agree with you, Gary, but I'm also going to disagree in the sense that you know, the quality education model, yeah, I mean, like, we could do all these things if we were there. That's absolutely, you know, what we need to keep advocating for and putting pressure on. At the state level. I think, you know, this question of effectiveness of programs, that is what the superintendent and his staff do. And what we've said as a board is we want to see that student achievement rise. And those are the goals we've set. And I think we can dig in deeper, and we can sort of ask in terms of a strategic plan and what are the dashboards around some of those programs. But the reality is, as a board, we did set those goals very clearly. We're going to get some data this fall to figure out. And, you know, at the TSCC meeting, they asked that same question: what's working? And the superintendent's team gave some pretty thorough responses about how they, you know, that's what we get in the proposed budget. I want to pay everybody in this district $25 an hour minimum. I want to be really clear about that from a values perspective. And you know, but you said it so well that, like, there are trade-offs, and this is the conversation Angela and I were having earlier, that there is not $100 million that we're hiding that we could give wages increases to people. There's not. We could pay $25 an hour tomorrow. We as a board could take that decision, and it would mean hundreds of fewer employees in this district, hundreds. So when we talk about the layoffs, right? Yeah, people keeping their jobs would make $25 an hour. The people who lost their jobs would be making $0, and the people who kept their jobs would be doing twice the work. So again, if we had the QEM, could we pay $25 an hour? We sure could, I think. I'll let Roberto make that estimate. But
because we all share the frustration, and to be clear with our audience, the quality education model would fund schools in Oregon at $11.8 billion. That's a difference of $1.5 billion, you know, per biennium. That translates to about $80 to $100 million coming to Portland Public. That would allow us to do all the things that we're talking about. Right? And, you know, we're hopeful that we'll get to 10.2 billion, but that's still $100 million short of our current operating costs. So we are still making cuts despite that increased number. And so that's the state of K-12.
I just wanted to clarify, Michelle, before you speak, that when I said this budget falls short, it was because of exactly that, the funding piece. And I will be voting yes.
I wanted to, Byron, I'm not sure if you've been involved in the conversations about participatory budgeting, but that is a fantastic tool to, it's not the entire budget, it's about 1% of budgets, that is kind of put into the hands of community to decide what the priorities are. And so participatory budgeting Oregon has been talking to someone, I'm not sure who, at Portland Public, and I think we might try that. I hope we do next year.
I think so too.
Got one more thing.
Dr. Hollins.
So on the resolution on number E, can someone explain that to me? I think it says the approval of the 2023-24 budget includes the closure of OLA program, and as such, the adopted budget matches the closure of thing. But as a board, do we usually vote on programs?
Yeah. So I'm happy to, or Roberto,
Somebody.
you can. Yeah. So the proposed budget from the superintendent this year eliminated funding for the OLA program. The approved budget we adopted, the approved budget we approved 3 weeks ago also eliminated funding for the OLA program. There is a board policy from quite a while ago that says the board, you know, signs off on or has to approve, you know, changes to or terminations of programs. And so that clause was added just to make sure that we're in compliance with that policy. But there's no change in the budget in terms of what we had previously discussed or voted on in terms of closing down the OLA program.
So that's not what I read from Liz on the email. Is usually we don't have to vote on certain programs versus, because when I read the resolution that we voted on for the program, it didn't say OLA, it just said,
To create a virtual
Correct,
learning option
right.
back, this was in April of 2021.
Right.
That was the authorization for the program. The board policy does require the board to give final approval to closing the program.
that's it.
Okay. If with that, we're ready to, we lost Chair Ailey. Well, she'll come back in a second. Board will now vote on Resolution 6718 to impose taxes and adoption of the 2023-24 budget for School District Number 1J, Multnomah County, Oregon. And I thought that was a long enough title that Ailey may be back. I'm seeing her. I know. So
We're voting, Ailey.
all of those in favor, please indicate by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no.
No.
No. Student Representative McMahon?
Well, my vote doesn't matter, so no.
Are there any abstentions? Okay, Resolution 6718 is approved by a vote of 5-2 with Student Representative McMahon voting no. And with that, we move on to policy rescissions.
Great. Okay, so we have a policy rescission and a policy revision before us. The policy rescission is on the limitations on use of facilities and grounds, and again, that's covered in other places. So we no longer need that policy. So we will bring Resolution 6719 before us. Now it's your turn.
Now it's my turn. With that, motion and a second to adopt Resolution 6719.
Motion.
Second.
Director Hollins moves and Director Lowry seconds. Is there any board discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment?
No.
The board will now vote on Resolution 6719. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Student Representative McMahon?
Yes.
Any abstentions? 6719 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative McMahon voting yes. And next, we have a second reading of revised complaint policy.
Okay, this is first, second reading, because we often do second, first. Anyway, I'm trying to be funny. It's not working. My last board meeting, I gotta bring the comedy. So this just clarifies some language about what? Well, there's a work session, but this is my last actual formal board meeting, and Amy's as well. But we have a bunch of other stuff going on. We got like 6 more meetings before we're fully done. So anyway, but this is the last time I get to do policies at a board meeting. It's so exciting. So this second reading of this policy revision just changes some language to make it clear about formal complaint and Division 22 to really clarify those. So that's all there is a little language change in this policy.
Great. Any board, a motion and a second to adopt Resolution 6720?
Motion.
Second.
Director Green moves, Director Holland seconds. Any board discussion? Ms. Bradshaw, any public comment?
No.
The board will now vote on Resolution 6720 to adopt the revised complaint policy. All in favor indicate by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
All opposed,
Yes.
please indicate by saying no. Student Representative McMahon?
Yes.
Any abstentions? Resolution 6720 is approved by a vote of 7-0. Student Representative McMahon voting yes. I was wondering if that was her final vote, but there's one more. The board will now vote on the consent agenda. Board members, if there are any items you'd like to pull for discussion, we can set those aside for the next time we meet. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
Yes, a resolution was added earlier today and was posted at that time, adding a field trip approval.
Yes, a field trip. Thank you. Board members, are there any items you would like to pull?
Once again, I would just like to say that the board has no business approving field trips, and that these poor students are having to wait for us to approve before they can know on their
Playing the
trip.
role of Andrew
Not
Scott.
a good use of our board time or energy.
My thunder
That
so
actually
stolen.
always takes more time than the actual vote, by the way.
So stolen. Any items anyone wants to pull?
Yep. The Work Systems Inc. contract. I have an outstanding question.
Okay,
That
so-
I asked it and I didn't get a response. So if you want it, I could ask it, or we can move it to the next meeting.
Okay, well, I guess I would just ask, does staff have an answer to the question on work systems?
I know there was an initial response to Director Brim Edwards. This is regarding some summer work programs for our students. I know slated to start post July 1st. Is this a time sensitive?
Okay, so just so everybody else knows what the question, because the question I ask is, when I looked at the contract, there was some specific metrics related to who was going to be, like numbers of students hired, and my question was there any sort of back-end evaluation of the experience of either the employers or the students about the internships? And I did get a response from Superintendent Guerrero that there was. And my follow-up question is, like, is that actually in the contract, or is it just the input metrics that are in the contract?
Excellent question. Good evening. I won't go through all the introductions, but good evening, everyone. Thank you for the question. So it's not in the individual contract, that specific contract, because it's left to the departments to individualize what that matrix will be. And so I think in the response, I was copied onto the response. And so there was an example of what a criteria would be, or an evaluation, like, for instance, if it was out of the Native Ed program, the Indian Education program. So there was just some examples of what could happen, or what could be a matrix by that specific department.
So this is just going to be my point about all the contracts is, and when I raised it before, I think you asked me to ask it about other contracts, which I do. And so this is an example of whether it's actually in the contracts, or what is then the district staff doing that is ensuring that we have some sort of evaluative effort on the back end. As I appreciated the front end metrics, but I also believe that we can have some summer hires, but then students don't show up, or from the employer experience it's bad, or it's bad from the student experience. And so it seems like I'm just going to be asking about what sort of, I guess, will the district then, if it's not in the contract, ask for metrics on the back end that need to be reported?
No, I appreciate that. I think you're asking about the accountability piece, and so the evaluation for the specific departments, and then the organization work systems has an external evaluation. But I think what I hear you saying is, could we next time make sure that that language is captured in the contract?
Yeah, and I understand it could be different, but it's just like sending it at the beginning versus like letting the program go and then saying, and then reporting, here's what the outcomes was versus here's the desired outcomes. We want 50 students to have a STEM-based work experience.
Yes.
And they have 80% attendance rate, and the employer says like this was great for us, and the student says it was the same. But something so that that's said at the beginning of what we're trying to achieve at the back end.
Absolutely. We'll make sure that we have that in the next one.
Thank you.
So just to clarify, are you okay with it moving forward?
I am
in the
okay with
consent
it moving
agenda?
forward.
Great.
Given the timing.
Yep.
And you're just trying to get.
No, I appreciated the conversation. I actually just wanted to make sure I was.
Yeah, no, I'm
respecting
I'm
Director
okay
Burnet's
because
position.
I feel confident that they're going to be.
Oh, she'll do it.
Them there. Yeah.
She'll do it.
So we need a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda.
Motion.
Second.
Director Green moves, and Director DePass seconds. Is there any further board discussion on the consent agenda? Nothing about the field trips. The board will now vote on resolutions 6715
I am
through
glad they're going on the
6716
wrestling championship.
and 6721. All those in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Student Representative McMahon.
Yes.
And any abstentions?
Yes. Because we use work systems.
Oh, got it. I thought I heard you vote yes. Got it. Consent agenda is approved by a vote of 6-0 with student representative, and with one abstention, and student representative McMahon voting for the last time, yes. And with that, This is the last regular meeting of the school year. Just a reminder, we do have a public meeting tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, and then we have another work session at the end of the month. And with that, we are adjourned.